Welcome, you've arrived. Somewhere between a question and a silence. Between the sound of your breath and the place where even breath disappears. This is the empty boat. A quiet stream of stories drifting gently across the ocean of your mind. Here nothing is forced, nothing is chased, nothing needs to be understood right away. Each story you're about to hear is a kind of doorway. Some open inwards, others dissolve entirely. These are not tales for the mind to conquer, but seeds for the soul to hold. They speak the language of stillness and carry the fragrance of ancient Zen, blended with the soft touch of modern healing. So breathe in gently. Let your shoulders drop. Let go of where you've been today and come. Float with me in the empty boat. Tonight we begin with the first of 25 stories. A small teacup, a sudden storm, and the wisdom of learning to let it all spill over. 1. The teacup and the storm. Asterisk, asterisk, the rain had begun softly, like a whisper. The kind of rain that barely touches the earth, that seems to hover instead between sky and soil. In the distance, wind stirred the bamboo leaves, and a wooden chime sang its hollow melody with every breeze. In a small tea house near the edge of a forgotten village, a young man sat in silence, shoulders drawn high, eyes fixed on a single porcelain cup before him. The cup was white, plain, empty, and yet he stared at it as though it contained the answer to his unrest. Why am I always anxious? He asked aloud, though no one else was in the room. Why can't I just let things be? Behind the sliding door, footsteps emerge, quiet and deliberate. The door slid open with a hush, and an old monk stepped in. His robe was the color of dried leaves, simple and faded, and his eyes seemed to smile even before his lips did. I heard your question, said the monk. Would you like some tea? The young man nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. The monk sat across from him, without another word, then began to pour. Steam curled into the dim space between them. The scent was earthy, calming like the smell of the forest after the first rain. The cup before the young man began to fill, and the monk kept pouring. A trickle spilled over the rim, then more. Tea ran down the sides of the cup and onto the table. Wait, the young man said. It's overflowing. The monk did not stop. He looked into the young man's eyes. This, he said gently, is your mind. The room went quiet, save for the dripping of tea onto the floor. You've come here full, the monk continued, full of plans, worries, fears, thoughts about how things should be, must be, cannot be. And when life adds anything new, no matter how gentle it spills. The young man sat back, startled. You asked why you feel anxious, said the monk. Because you are always trying to contain everything, every outcome, every variable, every emotion, but a teacup cannot hold the sky. They sat in silence. The young man stared at the puddle forming between them. The monk's story did not end there. Later, after the tea had been cleaned and silence had returned, he told a parable. From the Zen tradition, there was once a man who lived beside a lake, he said. He was proud of his clarity, his sense of control. Every morning, he polished his reflection in the water, wiping away leaves, dust, even ripples. He believed that as long as the water stayed calm, he could remain calm. But one night, a storm came. Winds tore the trees. Rain thrashed the surface of the lake. And in the morning, the man found the water muddy, murky, chaotic. He tried to clean it. He shouted at it. He wept. But the lake would not obey. Finally, exhausted, he sat at its edge and watched, and slowly, as the day warmed and the wind died down, the lake stilled on its own. The reflection returned not because he forced it, but because he stopped trying. The young man listened without interruption. Control, the monk said, is the greatest storm of all. Let go, and the water knows how to clear itself. In that tea house, something shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but like a thread uncoiling in the mind. The young man had come with so many questions about his career, his relationships, the pressure to succeed, the fear of failure, the fear of being left behind, the need to be right, the shame of not being enough, and yet none of these things had been solved. They had been set down. He realized now how tightly he had gripped his own thoughts, as if thinking more could protect him, as if worry itself was a form of control. But it wasn't. It was just noise. Noise inside a cup already full. He thought of the world outside the tea house, the endless scroll of news, the messages, the deadlines, the expectations, and he thought of the teacup so small, so fragile, so still. From a psychological view, what the young man experienced is deeply human. Our minds are conditioned to fear, uncertainty. We replay conversations. We plan endlessly. We anticipate disasters. We over-prepare. We imagine every possible outcome and try to control what is not yet real. This mental overfilling activates the brain's threat system. The amygdala floods us with cortisol. We become hypervigilant, anxious, restless. We believe that control is safety, but in truth, it's a mask. And masks, eventually, fall off. The more we try to hold on to what we cannot predict, the more we suffer. But what happens when we stop? What happens when we breathe and watch and allow the lake to settle on its own? What if we trusted the nature of the mind to return to stillness if we simply stopped pouring? Letting go does not mean giving up. It means no longer gripping. It means recognizing, I am not this fear. I am not this thought. I am not this storm. I am the one who watches the cup. And so, tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself, what am I trying to control that is not mine to hold? What would happen if I allowed it to overflow and watched it spill? What if my peace did not depend on outcomes, but on space? As the Buddha once said, let go of what's gone. Let go of what's not yet. Observe deeply what is. The teacup does not hold the sky, but the sky never needed holding. Close your eyes. Let your thoughts fall like rain, gently, softly, without resistance, and listen to the sound of one teacup, finally at rest. 2. The bell beneath the snow. Asterisk, asterisk. The first snow came without a sound. It drifted down like breath in winter air, covering everything in a weightless white silence. The forest seemed to hold itself, as if the trees knew that movement would shatter. The sacred hush. Somewhere beyond the trees, nestled in a valley hidden from all roads, stood a forgotten temple. Its roof sagged with age. Its lanterns were long unlit. But deep inside the wooden belly of that temple, something still waited. A bell. No one had heard it ring in decades. It was an old bronze bell, cast by hand and blessed by monks long gone. For years it had summoned the villagers to prayer, to mourning, to celebration, and finally to silence. When the last abbot passed away, no one remained to strike it. The bell fell asleep, until the day the girl came. She wasn't from the village. She wasn't from anywhere in particular. She had no plan, no map, only a numbness that had followed her through cities, through diagnoses, through failed appointments with therapists who saw her as a set of symptoms. One morning, she left everything behind and walked and walked and walked, walked, until her feet bled and her thoughts began to lose their grip. She arrived just before the snowfall. The temple offered no welcome, no warmth-only space, but that was enough. She swept the floor, she lit a fire, she boiled water, she sat, and the days passed. The bell remained silent. She didn't try to ring it. Something in her understood. This wasn't a place for noise. Instead, she listened, not for sounds, but for the space in between. The silence here wasn't empty, it was full of things she had never heard before. One night, as the wind curled under the door, she whispered, "Why do I feel so hollow?" It wasn't a dramatic question, not a cry for help, just a breath released into the dark, a question with no answer, or maybe one that didn't need one. Snow piled at the door, the wind softened, and the bell, deep inside the temple, did not move. But somehow, in the middle of that stillness, she felt something stir it in the air. But within her, the next morning, she sat with the bell. She stared at it, this heavy thing made to be loud, now half buried in silence. She placed her hand against its cold surface. There was no echo, no music, just touch. "I used to want to be heard," she said aloud. "Now I just want to be still." The bell said nothing, but she imagined it understood. There is an old Zen story. A monk once asked his master, "How can I attain peace?" The master pointed to a great bronze bell in the courtyard and said, "Go sit with the bell." The monk did as he was told. Day after day, he sat before the bell, expecting a teaching, a sound, a miracle. But the bell did not ring. It did not speak. It did not move. One day, frustrated, the monk asked again, "Why the bell? It teaches nothing." The master smiled, "And yet it sits, still, full, complete, without asking, without shouting, without proving anything." Then he added, "Do not chase the ringing. Become the bell." In modern psychology, silence is often treated as absence, something to be filled. We fill it with words, distractions, devices. We turn on music not to enjoy it, but to avoid quiet. We talk even when we have nothing to say, afraid of what might rise in the gap between voices. But healing doesn't happen in noise. Healing happens in the pause. It is in silence that the nervous system slows. That breath returns to its rhythm. That thought stops screaming long enough for us to hear the truth beneath them. The girl in the temple didn't need answers. She needed space. So many who carry depression, anxiety, grief, were not looking for solutions. They are seeking something more subtle, more sacred, the permission to exist without being fixed, to sit like the bell, heavy, silent, still, and yet whole. Too often we chase catharsis. We look for the ring, the big change, the breakthrough moment. But not all healing arrives like thunder. Some comes like snow, quiet, soft, layered. It covers the noise until the only sound left is your own heartbeat. And then, not even that. The girl stayed through winter. She stopped asking why. She began tending to small things, mending an old robe she found in the closet, sweeping the tatami mats, feeding a fox that wandered by at dusk. She no longer sought meaning in grand gestures. She found it in the act of showing up each morning. She bowed to the bell, not because it was sacred, but because she had learned to respect what is silent and still. And one night, weeks or months later, time had lost its urgency. A storm swept through the valley. The wind howled, the trees groaned, and a branch broke loose, crashing through the roof of the temple. Striking the bell, it rang. The sound rippled through the mountains like a memory. Awakened, deep, vibrant, clear. She stood barefoot in the snow, listening. She did not smile. She did not cry. She simply breathed. And in that breath, something within her also rang. Not as noise, not as pain, but as presence. So tonight, perhaps you too have come here not to be fixed, but to sit with your own silence, to sit with the bell within you that has not rung in years, not because it is broken, but because it is waiting for space, for rest, for snow to fall on your tired questions. You do not have to make a sound to be real. You do not have to prove your worth by how loud you ring. You can be like the bell, still, silent, sacred. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." But tonight, maybe no word is needed at all. Just snow, just breath, just being here. Let your shoulders fall. Let your mind stop ringing. Let the snow cover your worry and listen. Somewhere beneath the silence, the bell is already singing. Can you hear it? It sounds like you. 3. When the wind stops asking why, the wind had been following her for days. It wasn't loud, not violent, just always there, like a child tugging at her sleeve, whispering questions she couldn't quite hear. Sometimes it rattled the window panes of her rented room. Other times it circled her shoulders when she walked beneath the bare trees of the monastery grounds. It wasn't just wind, it was the restlessness inside her, given shape, given sound. She had come to this place, far in the hills of the north, because her thoughts had become too loud in the city. At home, everything spoke at once. The news, the phone, the mind, especially the mind. It asked constantly, "What's wrong with me? Why am I like this? What am I missing? What should I be doing? What if I've failed? What if I'll never be free of this?" And then came the biggest one, the one behind all others. Why do I feel this way when nothing is wrong? That question haunted her. She had a job, a bed, food, people who cared, at least in theory. And yet she woke each morning as if something inside her had been stolen. Like a bird that sang only at night, so quietly that no one else could hear. The monks did not speak much. That was one reason she chose this place. The temple was old, worn down by seasons and prayer. There was a garden, a pond with fish, and a meditation hall with wooden floors so soft they seemed to remember every footstep. On her 4th evening, the wind blew harder than usual. She wrapped herself in a shawl and wandered outside, hoping to tire her thoughts with cold air. Beneath a twisted pine tree, she saw an old monk in grey robes, standing completely still, as if rooted. His face was turned toward the distant mountains. His eyes were closed. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Am I interrupting something?" The monk opened his eyes, but he didn't seem startled. He looked at her the way one might look at a falling leaf, not to catch it, not to analyze it, just to witness it pass. "You're not interrupting," he said, "but the wind is." She looked up, unsure. "The wind?" she asked. He nodded. "Toward the swaying trees. It keeps asking why." She blinked. "What do you mean?" The monk turned and began walking. Not fast, not slow, just present. She followed. They moved across the stone path toward the meditation hall. The wind stirred the bamboo. Leaves brushed the ground like old memories. The monk paused at the door. "Sometimes," he said, "we come looking for answers, but what we really need is for the question to stop echoing." And with that, he stepped inside, leaving her with the wind that night. She sat cross-legged in the meditation hall, surrounded by quiet. Her breath was shallow. Her knees ached. Her mind kept running laps. Why do I feel hollow? Why do I always ruin things? Why do I never feel enough? She tried to focus on her breathing, but the questions kept pulling her back. Eventually, she opened her eyes. The old monk sat across from her, still as stone. "Do you ever get tired of thoughts?" she asked. He opened one eye. "Not tired," he said. "Just less interested." That confused her. "They're my thoughts," she said. "They feel real, important, are they?" he asked gently. "Or are they just wind?" She didn't reply. The monk smiled, not unkindly. "Let me tell you a story," he began, his voice slow, like rain falling on dry earth. "There was once a student who came to a Zen master with a troubled heart. She asked the master, 'Why do I always feel anxious, even when I try to let go?' The master replied, 'Because letting go is not the same as surrendering. You're still asking why, which means you are still holding on.' The student frowned. 'But if I don't ask why, how will I understand?' The master picked up a leaf from the ground. 'Did this leaf ask why it fell?' The student said, 'Nothing.' The master continued, 'The mind thinks understanding will heal it. But the heart only wants to rest, to be cradled in silence, not dissected. So I should stop thinking?' The student asked. 'No,' said the master. 'Just stop believing every thought is a command.' And then he said, 'When the wind stops asking why, it becomes the breeze, and the breeze knows peace.' She listened to the story, unsure whether to laugh or cry. It was too simple, or maybe it was too true. All her life, she had been analyzing her pain. Therapy, journals, books. She was good at it. She could name every trauma, every trigger, every theory. And yet, here she was, still exhausted, still searching, still wind-dash tossed. No one had ever told her that maybe the mind itself was part of the storm. She looked at the old monk. "How do I stop asking?" she whispered. He did not answer. Instead, he reached into his robe and pulled out a small object of feather. Light, white, curled. "This was left on my cushion this morning," he said. "I don't know where it came from. I don't know which bird it belonged to. I don't even know if it came through the window or was carried in by my robe." He held it up still. "It's beautiful." He set it down between them, "and I don't need to know why." Modern psychology often tells us that understanding is the first step toward healing. And this is true sometimes. Insight can illuminate hidden patterns, can bring relief to the confused and clarity to the overwhelmed. But there is a shadow side to understanding, when it becomes obsession, when we analyze not to heal, but to control, when we interrogate our pain so often that we reopen wounds just to examine them again. This is called cognitive rumination, a loop of questions that pretend to be helpful, but really just prolong suffering. Why do I feel this way? What does this mean about me? Will I always be like this? These are not paths forward, they are circular. Trails in the forest of the mind. The nervous system does not heal by knowing everything. It heals by feeling safe, And safety sometimes is silence, is stillness, is the absence of interrogation. When we stop asking why, we make space for something else to arise. Compassion, presence, peace. The next day, she returned to the pine tree. The wind was softer now. She closed her eyes and listened, not for meaning, not for a message, just for the feeling of the wind brushing her skin. She didn't ask what it meant. She didn't ask what would come next. She just felt. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like a question. She felt like a body, a breath, a presence, a breeze. That night, before she slept, she left her journal closed. She didn't write down her thoughts. She didn't try to capture the lesson. Instead, she whispered to the wind, "I don't need to know why." And the wind, perhaps for the first time, did not answer. It simply passed through the window like a sigh and disappeared. Tonight, before you close your eyes, perhaps you too can pause. You don't need to fix yourself. You don't need to explain your sadness. You don't need to understand every fear. You can simply sit and breathe and let the questions lose their urgency. As the Buddha once said, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Let your thoughts settle like dust in sunlight. Let the wind pass without asking why, and sleep as the feather sleeps carried, not carried without resistance. Welcome to the breeze. 4. A monk's bowl of ashes long ago in a forest cloister draped in moss and moonlight. There lived a monk named Anjan. His robes were tattered, his sandals worn thin, and yet there was a lightness to him, a stillness that made the birds land near his shoulders as if he were a stone in the stream. He had lived in that temple for over 30 years, never venturing far, never asking for much, except one thing, his bowl. It was a simple wooden bowl, carved from cypress by his teacher. Decades before, darkened by time, its edges were soft from thousands of morning meals. He ate from it, cleaned it with river water, polished it in silence. To others, it was just a bowl. But to Anjan, it was memory, it was devotion, it was the last thing his teacher ever touched before death. No one dared touch it then. One spring, a group of young monks arrived for their seasonal training, eager, talkative, full of theories. One of them, a curious novice named Ren, had been told of Anjan's serenity and wished to learn from him. "Master Anjan," he said one morning, kneeling on the temple porch, "I've heard you no longer speak in words, but only in gestures." Anjan looked at him, smiled gently, and pointed to the broom in Ren's hand. Ren bowed, then swept the steps in silence. Later that afternoon, Ren wandered into the dining hall. He was hungry. He had forgotten his own bowl in the meditation hall. Seeing a lone bowl on the shelf, clean empty. Unclaimed, he took it. It was Anjan's. Ren ladled rice into it, then sat under the plum tree and ate slowly, appreciating the warm breeze. Anjan saw him. He said nothing. He returned to the meditation hall, bowed before the altar, then took the bowl from Ren's hands when he had finished. And without word or hesitation, Anjan carried it to the fire pit behind the temple. There he placed it on the stones. He struck a match and burned it. The young monks watched in silence as the flames consumed the bowl. It cracked, curled, blackened, until it was nothing but a fragile layer of ash. Ren ran forward. "I didn't know it was yours," he said, eyes wide. "Why didn't you stop me?" Anjan picked up the ashes with his bare hands. Then he let them fall like snow through his fingers. Then he bowed and walked away. That night, the monks whispered, he burned his only bowl. Why didn't he scold the novice? Why destroy something so precious? But the elder abbot, who had known Anjan since youth, simply nodded. He has finally let go, he said, and smiled. Years later, Ren would say that single moment taught him more than all the sutras he had ever read. Because letting go is not about loss. Letting go is about the quiet power of surrender. There are things we cling to that no longer serve us. Objects, beliefs, grudges, identities. We protect them, polish them, define ourselves by them, even when they weigh us down, even when they stop us from growing. Anjan's bowl was sacred not because it was valuable, but because it symbolized his attachment. And in one silent gesture, he showed that even sacred things must be released when they stand in the way of deeper freedom. It wasn't anger, it wasn't shame, it was clarity. A monk does not carry ashes into the next life. Modern psychology speaks of cognitive attachment. We attach to objects, roles, stories about ourselves. I am the reliable one. I am the broken one. I can't let go because this thing defines me. These attachments form our identity, but they also become our prison. The brain is designed to protect what feels familiar, even if it's painful. That's why people stay in toxic relationships. That's why trauma survivors sometimes recreate the past. That's why we fear change, even when we crave it. Letting go feels like death to the ego, but it is birth to the soul. Anjan's bowl was a metaphor for all we hold too tightly. His act was not self-punishment, was release. He taught not with words, but with flame, and flame, Purifies. In your own life, what is your bowl? What are you polishing that you no longer need? An identity, a belief, a past hurt you cannot stop revisiting. Is it helping you, or is it keeping you small? Letting go does not mean forgetting. It means honoring something, and then setting it free. As the Buddha said, you only lose what you cling to. Before you sleep tonight, imagine the thing you cannot part with. Picture it clearly, its shape, its weight, its emotional grip. Then, imagine setting it gently onto the stones. Strike the match, watch it. Burn not in anger, not in fear, but in devotion. Say thank you, and walk away lighter. Somewhere in the forest of your heart, ashes fall like snow, and the wind begins to carry you forward. 5. The door without a lock. The house was quiet, but not empty. At the far end of the hallway, where light from the paper lanterns could barely reach, there was a door. Simple wood, no carvings, no markings. The girl had tried to open it many times, but it never moved. It didn't rattle or creak. It didn't resist. It just didn't open. She didn't know what was behind it, only that whenever she stood in front of it, something in her chest tightened. A coldness, a fear that didn't come from anything. She could name it was the door to something unfinished. Maybe pain, maybe memory, maybe both. She had been living at the temple for a week, hoping the silence would calm her. But it hadn't. She still woke with her hands clenched, her jaw aching, her dreams restless, and the door was always there. She had asked the temple keeper once, an elderly monk who tended to the garden and slept in the small room behind the kitchen, what's behind the door at the end of the hall. The monk had looked at her gently, then said, "What door?" The girl laughed nervously. "The wooden one, past the scroll room." He shook his head slowly. "There is no door past the scroll room." She stared at him, but she knew what she had seen. She had touched it. She had tried to open it every day. That night, she returned to the hallway. The scrolls fluttered softly. In the breeze from the open window, she passed the last pillar and stood before the door. It was still there, still closed, still. Breathless, she reached for the handle and pulled. Nothing, it didn't budge. She knelt down, pressed her forehead to the floor, and whispered, "What am I not seeing?" The wood was warm. She stayed there, breathing against it, until sleep took her. She dreamed she was inside a locked room, stone walls, a high window, nothing but silence. She pounded on the door. No one answered. She shouted, "Let me out." A voice responded, not from outside, but from within the room. "There is no lock." She looked. The handle was simple. There was no keyhole, no bolt, no chain, just a door she had assumed was locked, because it had never opened. She reached out and pushed gently. The door swung open without sound, and she awoke. There is an old Zen story about a man who feared his own mind. He built mental walls, rules, judgments, identities to protect himself. But the more walls he built, the more trapped he felt. One day, exhausted, he dreamed he was in a prison cell. He shouted for help. A monk appeared and said, "There are no locks on your walls." The man looked, and it was true. He had been sitting in an open space all along, mistaking his fear for a boundary. The story ends with a single sentence. He stopped asking how to escape, and simply walked away. The girl awoke on the floor of the hallway. The door was still before her, but something had changed. She stood up, took a breath, and this time, instead of pulling, she pushed. The door opened with ease. Inside was no monster, no pain, no screaming shadow of her past. It was a room, plain, dusty, sunlight streaming through a window that had been closed for years, and on the floor, a photograph. She knelt. It was of her as a child, smiling, barefoot in the garden of a home long gone. In the corner, her mother knelt beside her, arms around her waist. Tears rose, not the burning kind, the kind that come when something inside softens. She had not forgotten the moment. She had buried it, because not long after, her mother had left. The love in that photo had felt like a betrayal, and so she had locked it away. But there had never been a lock, only fear, only avoidance, only assumption. She sat in the room for a long time, breathing, and for the first time in years, she felt open, not perfect, not fixed, just open. We all have such doors, things we won't look at, parts of ourselves we assume are too painful, too dangerous, too broken to touch. So we build lives around those doors. We decorate the hallway. We pretend it's not there. We keep busy. We ask endless questions. What's wrong with me? Why can't I be happy? How do I heal? But the question is not always how. Sometimes it is simply, am I willing to see? Most suffering comes not from what we carry, but from what we avoid. What we suppress, we fear. What we fear, we flee. And what we flee grows in the dark. But when we finally turn toward it, not to destroy it, not to solve it, but to sit with it softens. It becomes a room, with light, with memory, with breath. The brain interprets pain as threat. But not all pain is danger. Some pain is grief that never had space. Some pain is love that never had closure. Some pain is the echo of something once beautiful that we locked away. And healing is not always fixing. Sometimes it's seeing. Sometimes it's standing before the door and trying the handle again. Gently, without force, just with willingness. That night, the girl placed the photograph on the altar. not as an offering, not as a symbol, but as a truth. A part of her had been closed. Now it breathed again. She lit a single candle, bowed once, then walked out into the garden. The wind was warm, the moon hung low, as if watching, and the door behind her stayed open tonight. Perhaps you feel something inside you is closed, a memory, a sadness, a question you've been afraid to ask. Do not force it open, just sit with it. Place your hand on the door not to push, but to feel, breathe, and ask, is this really locked? Or have I simply never given it the chance to open? As the Buddha said, in the seeing, just the seeing. In the hearing, just the hearing. In the knowing, just the knowing. You do not need to understand what's behind the door. You only need to be willing to look. And perhaps, just perhaps, that will be enough. Sleep gently tonight, and let the door inside you breathe. 6. The bamboo does not hurry. There is a kind of quiet only found in the mountains, not the silence of emptiness, but the kind filled with unseen presence, crickets under stones, moss growing in shadow, wind gliding between trees. On the eastern slope of the hill, behind the temple, stood a grove of bamboo, tall, patient, unmoving in their grace, even as wind passed like breath through their green ribs. The boy was 12 when he first saw them. He had been sent to the monastery by his father, a man who believed silence could correct what punishment could not. The boy had been restless, they said, always questioning, always jumping ahead, always afraid of not being enough. He hated the silence here. There was no television, no friends, no distractions, only stillness and tasks. Each morning he fetched water, each afternoon he swept the courtyard. Each evening he stared at the walls during zazen, counting his breath, fidgeting with his knees, thinking of all the things he should already be doing, becoming, achieving. One afternoon, after breaking a ceramic bowl by accident, he ran up the path toward the bamboo grove and collapsed in frustration. He pounded the earth with his fists. When will I be better? He cried. When will I stop being like this? He wasn't sure what he meant, only that he was tired of not knowing how to grow into something good. A voice answered behind him, "The bamboo knows." Startled, the boy turned. It was the old monk who tended the temple gardens. His voice was rough with age, but held no scolding. "Knows what?" the boy asked. The monk stepped into the grove. The bamboo reached high above them like green cathedral columns. "That growth doesn't rush," he said, "and neither does healing." The boy frowned. "I don't understand." The monk tapped the nearest stalk. "Do you know how bamboo grows?" The boy shook his head. For the first year, the monk said, "You see nothing." For the second year, still nothing. Even in the third year, it may only rise an inch. It does not waste energy on what is visible. It spends its time growing. Deep, wide roots. He looked at the boy, and then, one day, when the roots are ready, it grows, fast, tall, with strength nothing can shake. The boy looked around. The grove swayed slightly in the breeze, making no sound. "I thought it just grew." "All things grow," the monk said, "but not all things hurry." That night, the boy lay awake thinking about the bamboo. How many times had he felt like nothing was changing, like he wasn't becoming anything, like all his effort led nowhere. He had tried so hard to be better, better at school, better at being calm, better at not being angry. But no matter how much he tried, he still felt like something was wrong inside. He didn't realize that growing roots is a quiet process, that becoming begins below the surface. There is a Zen story about a student who asked his teacher, "How long will it take me to reach enlightenment if I study hard?" 10 years, said the teacher. "And if I try even harder? 20 years. And if I give everything I have? 30. The student was confused. Why does working harder take longer? The teacher smiled. Because when your eyes are only on the mountain peak, you miss the path beneath your feet. In the modern world, everything demands speed, faster results, quicker healing, instant change. Fix me now. But the mind does not bloom on command, and the heart does not rush its seasons. Neuropsychology tells us that real change, especially emotional or behavioral, takes time. The brain rewires through repetition, reflection, and rest. Not force, not guilt, not speed. There is a concept in trauma healing called window of tolerance. It means growth can only occur when the nervous system feels safe, and safety doesn't come through pressure, it comes through presence. Like bamboo, you may not see the roots forming, but they are. Every time you sit quietly with your sadness, instead of running, every time you forgive yourself for not being there. Yet, every time you return to your breath, roots, deep ones, seasons passed. The boy grew, he learned not to rush. Through Zazen, he stopped comparing himself to the older monks. He began to enjoy sweeping. It gave his hands something gentle to do. It grounded him. Years later, he returned to the bamboo grove not as a boy, but as a young man. He brought with him a novice who had just arrived. The novice was frustrated, anxious, afraid. He wasn't changing fast enough, and the young man smiled. He led him to the same grove, pointed to the bamboo. "Did you know," he said, "for the first few years it doesn't grow at all?" The novice looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because it's busy becoming. And now perhaps you are like the boy once was, trying, struggling, waiting for proof that your work is working, wondering why you still feel heavy, still afraid, still uncertain. But maybe, just maybe, it's not failure. Maybe it's root work. Maybe your soul is laying down deep pathways for the next stage of your becoming, not on your schedule, but on nature. And nature does not hurry. It unfolds perfectly in its time. Tonight, before you sleep, place a hand on your chest, breathe slowly, and say quietly, "I am not behind. I am not broken. I am growing roots." And if you listen carefully, you may hear the bamboo swaying in the dark, not in rush, but in rhythm, and always, always growing. 7. Leaves know how to fall. Autumn had come to the valley quietly, not with thunder or rain, but with breath, a golden hush that settled over the trees like a warm shawl. The leaves had begun to fall one by one, each drifting downward as though they knew something the rest of the world had forgotten. In a small village by the river, where the air still held the scent of wood smoke and rice, an old woman sat alone on her porch. Her name was Lynn. Her hands, folded in her lap, were soft with age. Her eyes watched the sky, but her thoughts were elsewhere. This was the first autumn without her daughter. It had been nearly a year. A quiet illness, then a sudden decline. There had been no storm, no dramatic goodbye, only the slow, unkind certainty of losing someone breath by breath. Lynn had buried her daughter beneath the willow tree by the water, where she used to play as a child. Since then, Lynn had not wept. She had gone on with life, preparing rice, feeding the chickens, sweeping the shrine, she spoke to no one of the hollow ache inside her chest. Grief had not yet arrived as tears. It arrived as silence. She believed she had made peace with it, until the day a single leaf landed in her tea. It was red, soft-edged, perfect. She stared at it, and for reasons she could not explain, tears came. They came without warning, without drama. They came the way the leaf had come, gently, but wholly, and she did not stop them. That evening, she walked the narrow path toward the old temple. She did not know why. Her feet simply followed something ancient and soft. At the edge of the path stood a monk in grey robes, sweeping the steps. He looked up, smiled. "I lost someone," she said, voice trembling. The monk bowed. "Then you've been touched by love," he said, and she wept again. Not from sorrow, but from the feeling of being seen. Later, as they shared tea on the wooden porch, she asked him a question she had never dared speak aloud. Why does it still hurt, even after all this time? The monk took a breath, watching the wind dance through the maple trees. Because grief is not a problem to be solved, he said. It is a river, and it does not stop flowing just because the world wants it to. She looked down. I thought I had accepted it. I thought I was strong. The monk gently placed his hand around the teacup. Strength, he said, is not the absence of feeling. It is the courage to let fall what must fall. He pointed to the trees. Watch them. They do not beg the leaves to stay. They do not curse the wind. They simply release. She followed his gaze. Leaves drifted in soft spirals to the ground, each one letting go with a kind of grace she had never noticed before. They know, he said. They know how to fall. There is a Zen parable of a woman who lost her only child. She went to the Buddha, begging for a way to bring the child back. The Buddha told her, "Bring me a mustard seed from a house untouched by death." She searched for days. Every home she entered had its own story, of a lost father, a fallen sister, a vanished love. She returned with empty hands, but in her emptiness she had found companionship. Her pain had not vanished, but it had shifted. The Buddha said, "You have buried your child in the world," and she wept for others, for herself, and for the simple truth that no one is alone in their sorrow. Modern psychology speaks of grief as a non-linear path. It does not move in stages, clean and orderly. It is circular, a spiral. It returns unexpectedly, a scent, a song, a change in the weather. Many try to move on, to suppress, to stay strong, but unprocessed grief becomes tension. It clings to the body, to the breath, to the heart's capacity to open again. Grief demands space, presence, and above all, gentleness. In trauma healing, there is a concept called compassionate witness. It means sitting with someone's pain, not to fix it, but simply to hold it, to acknowledge, yes, this happened, and you are still here. Sometimes, that witness must be ourselves. We must sit beside our own sorrow like a friend, like the tree sits beside the falling leaf and lets it go. Lynn stayed at the temple. For 3 days, she helped sweep. She cleaned the altar. She folded cloths and lit candles. She did not speak of her daughter again, but she carried her in every motion. On the 3rd morning, she returned to the willow tree by the river. She brought nothing, no flowers, no offerings, only her breath. She sat on the stone bench and watched the leaves fall, and then she whispered, "You may go." She did not mean she was forgetting. She meant she was ready to release the pain that clung like frost. She imagined her daughter's laughter rising like wind, and she smiled. For the first time in a long while, she smiled. There are things we do, not want to let go of people, moments, lives we once lived. We hold on, afraid that release means abandonment. But letting go is not betrayal. Letting go is honoring the season. To grieve is to love fully. To weep is to remember without denial. And to let go is to trust that what has passed will live not in clinging, but in presence. The trees do not forget their leaves, but they know when to open their hands. So must we tonight. If you are grieving whether a person, a past, or a part of yourself, know this. You do not have to be done. You do not have to be strong. You do not have to be over it. You are simply standing under the tree of your heart, waiting, and one day, maybe not tonight, maybe not soon, you will feel the wind. You will open, and a leaf will fall, and you will weep, not in sorrow, but in grace, as the Buddha said. Even death is not to be feared by one who has lived wisely. Grief is the echo of love. Let it echo, let it fall, let it rest, and breathe with it, until the leaves know your name, and the ground remembers your prayer. 8. The mirror that doesn't speak it began with a mirror, a plain one, round, slightly chipped along the edge. It hung in the corner of a dusty guest house at the foot of a mountain where travelers came to rest on their way to somewhere else. No one paid much attention to the mirror. It didn't shine, it didn't flatter. It simply reflected. But for Min, the mirror became an obsession. He had come to the mountain not for retreat, but escape. In the city, things had unraveled. A failed job, a failed marriage, a father who hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. The shame was thick and shapeless, following him like smoke. He told himself he came here to think, but what he did most was look at the mirror. Each morning, he stood before it and stared at the lines around his mouth, at the dark circles under his eyes, at the way his shoulders slumped as if apologizing for something he had never spoken aloud. He looked, and the mirror looked back. It never said a word, but its silence said everything. You are a failure. You are not enough. You are wrong, broken, disappointing. Min wasn't sure if the mirror was showing him what he was or what he feared, but every day he returned to it, as if waiting for it to change, as if waiting for it to forgive him. He stayed at the guest house longer than planned. The owner, an old woman with gentle eyes and quiet steps, asked no questions. She simply left warm food at his door. Sometimes he didn't touch it. Hunger felt like penance. One morning she knocked. Softly, "There is a temple above the ridge," she said. "They don't have mirrors. You may like it there." Min said nothing, but the next day he walked. He climbed the narrow path through pine trees and mist, until he reached the old monastery that sat folded into the mountain like it had always been there. The monk who opened the gate did not ask who he was. He only said, "Welcome." In the temple there were no mirrors, only bowls, cushions, wood. Breath. Min expected it to feel foreign, but it didn't. It felt like a room he had forgotten inside himself. He joined the daily routine, woke with the bell, sat in silence, ate rice and broth, listened to wind pass through bamboo days past. He did not speak much, but slowly the mirror inside him began to fade, until one afternoon he found himself scrubbing the meditation hall floor when a young monk approached with a question. "Why do you never look at yourself?" the boy asked. Min froze. "What do you mean?" The boy shrugged. You turn away from every reflection, the bowl, the water basin, even the rice spoon. Min sat back on his heels. He hadn't noticed. But it was true. He was afraid, still afraid. That evening, Min approached the abbot, an old monk who moved like smoke and carried silence like a second robe. I have spent years running from my reflection, Min said, and when I look, I only see what I hate. The abbot nodded slowly. Would you like to see a different kind of mirror? He asked. Min blinked. What do you mean? The abbot stood and motioned for him to follow. They walked outside, past the bell tower and into the grove behind the temple. There, beneath a ginkgo tree, was a small pond, still, clear, untouched. The abbot sat on a rock. This is the original mirror, he said, and it never speaks. Min knelt beside the water and looked. At first, he only saw himself, the same worn face, the same shame. But then, he noticed something else. The water didn't judge, it simply reflected. If he smiled, it smiled. If he wept, it rippled. But it never added, never took away, never said, you are wrong, never said, you are good, just there, silent, complete, there. Is a Zen koan? A student asked the master, what is the true self? The master held up a mirror. The student frowned, but that only shows what I already know. The master replied, only if you keep speaking over it. The self, in its purest form, does not need explanation. It does not argue. It does not perform. It simply is. But we rarely meet that self, because we believe the mind's narrative more than the body's truth. We confuse thought with identity, and we forget that mirrors real, mirrors never lie, nor do they judge, they just show, and then go silent. Modern psychology calls this the inner critic. It is the voice we inherit, usually from childhood, from systems, from shame. You're lazy, you're not smart, you'll never be loved. We hear it so often we mistake it for truth. But it is not the voice of truth, it is the voice of fear. Neuroscience shows us that these thought patterns can be changed not by fighting them, but by seeing them clearly and gently releasing them through presence, through breath, through stillness, through silence. The mirror does not change us. It simply lets us meet ourselves without commentary, and in that, healing begins. Min returned to the pond every morning. Sometimes he sat for hours, not to analyze, not to plan, but to look. He began to see something softer in his face, not because his face had changed, but because he had. He began to understand. The face is only the surface, the real self is beneath, in the breath that arrives, even when we are not worthy, in the heart that beats even, when we are ashamed, in the silence that holds us, even when we cannot hold ourselves. He no longer feared the mirror, because now he knew what it reflected was not fixed. It was a moment, a season, and all seasons change. Eventually, Min left the monastery. He bowed deeply to the abbot, to the trees, to the silence that had taught him so much. He returned to the city, to the noise, to the same problems, but he was not the same Dot in his small apartment. He placed a bowl of water near the window. Every morning he looked into it and smiled, not because he had become perfect, but because he had become real tonight. If you fear what you might see in your own reflection, know this: you are not the judgments, you are not the story, you are not the cracks, the lines, the old regrets. You are the breath behind the mirror, the presence before the thought, and the mirror does not speak, because it does not need to, It already sees you as whole as you are, and so can you, as the Buddha once said. Peace comes from within, do not seek it without. Let the mirror be still, let the thoughts settle, and meet yourself, not with words, but with silence. 9. Clouds do not argue with the sky. It was nearly dusk when the storm came, not with lightning, not with thunder, just the long grey of late autumn spilling across the valley. In the kitchen, the family argued, voices rising like smoke. A father's clenched words, a son's slammed door, a mother caught between. Nothing new, just another evening of old wounds being recycled through louder tones. Anar stood outside, his back pressed to the wooden frame of the shed, eyes fixed on the sky. He had become good at this, disappearing without going anywhere, while the house burned with anger he couldn't fix. He watched clouds gather. He had always been drawn to clouds. Even as a child, he found comfort in their silence. The way they passed overhead without asking for attention, sometimes heavy, sometimes light, always moving, never staying, never fighting. Inside the house, the voices clashed again. Accusations, silence, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful but sharp-edged. In came the crying. He closed his eyes. Why does it always feel like this? He thought. Why can't they see how much it hurts? Why does every word feel like it's aimed at my ribs? He wanted to shout, to run, to push the sky open and climb inside it. But instead, he sat in the grass. Let the wind move through his sleeves. Let the cold settle against his spine. He watched a single white cloud drift between darker ones. It didn't argue, it simply passed through. The next morning, he left without telling anyone. A small bag, a bottle of water, a note, I'll be back. I need quiet. He didn't know where he was going, only that he was walking toward silence. By evening, he reached a low hill where an old monastery rested between two curved slopes. Lanterns glowed softly. Smoke rose from the chimney. A monk sat sweeping leaves, his movements slow and unbeard. Ashred.an stood at the gate for a long time before the monk looked up. I'm not here to stay, Anar said. I just need to be away. The monk nodded. Then come in. They ate in silence. Rice, pickled roots, and a bowl of clear soup. The quiet wasn't heavy. It didn't push down like the silences at home. It opened something, gave space for breath to be heard. After dinner, they sat in the garden. Crickets sang in the tall grass. You carry noise in your chest, the monk said softly. INH looked down. My family fights, he whispered. Always, and no one ever listens. It feels like I'm screaming inside, even when I'm quiet. The monk stirred the tea. Do you want to scream back? He asked. I do, I said, but I don't want to become like them. The monk smiled. That is the edge of awakening. There is a Zen parable of a man standing on a bridge, shouting at the river. You should flow north, he yells. You're going the wrong way, a passerby asks. Why are you shouting at the water? Because it doesn't listen, the man replies. But the river is not here to argue, says the passerby. It is here to flow. Later that night, the monk handed Anne her broom. Would you sweep the path by the bamboo? He asked. H nodded. The leaves crackled beneath the bristles. It was the first time in months that his hands felt steady. The moon rose, the sky cloudless, still. The next day, Anne asked a question. How do you stay calm when people throw words at you? The monk looked toward the clouds drifting over the temple. Do the clouds argue with the sky? He asked. No, Anne replied. Do they stop to explain themselves? No. Do they need to win? No. The monk nodded. Then why should we? Modern psychology speaks of emotional reactivity. When we feel attacked, belittled, unseen, our nervous system goes into defense. Fight, flight, freeze. It's automatic. Adrenaline surges. The prefrontal cortex shuts down. We speak without clarity. We react instead of respond. But over time, this pattern becomes identity. I am angry. I must protect myself. I need to be heard. Yet not all battles need fighting. Not all voices deserve our response. There is power in choosing. Stillness over retaliation, in choosing presence over reaction, in being the sky, not the storm. This is not weakness. This is restraint. This is wisdom. S is wisdom. There stayed 3 days. He spoke little. Walked the garden. Sat with the wind. He didn't expect an answer. He received something. Deeper perspective. He saw that his pain was real, but so was his capacity to hold it without echoing it, without multiplying it, without handing it back. He saw that he did not have to become what had harmed him. He could become the one who witnessed, the one who softened, the one who let the clouds pass without comment. When he returned home, the house was the same dot. A father tired from work, a mother silent at the stove, a younger brother playing too loudly, but something had shifted in him. When the next argument came, as it always did, he didn't flinch, he listened. Then he walked outside, looked up at the sky, and remembered, clouds don't argue, they drift, they carry storms. Yes, but they always keep moving. He would move to Dot, not away from his family, but toward a different way of being. He would become the space that held the noise without becoming it, and little by little, the noise began to soften, even in them, even in him. Tonight, perhaps you feel attacked by words you cannot control, by people who don't understand you, by pain that repeats itself. Know this, you do not have to explain your peace. You do not have to defend your stillness. You can let others be clouds. You can let yourself be sky, as the Buddha said. Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal law. Let the storm pass. Let the words fade, breathe, and be what holds everything without needing to hold anything. Sleep tonight like the sky, open, vast, and free. 10. The old man who forgot his name, the villagers, called him simply Angjia. The old man, he lived at the edge of the forest, in a crooked wooden hut, where vines climbed the windows, and moss had begun to claim the stairs. No one remembered when he had first arrived. He seemed to have always been there, sweeping leaves, feeding the birds, humming songs no one else knew. But there was one strange thing about the old man. He had forgotten his name, not in the way the elderly sometimes forget details. No, he truly did not remember what he had once been called, not his childhood name, not the name on paper, not even the name he was known by during his younger years in the city. When asked, he would only smile. I lost it, he'd say, and never found a reason to pick it up again. At first, the villagers pitied him. Then they grew used to him. Then they began to envy him because he was happy, genuinely, serenely happy. He walked like the breeze, sat like a stone warmed by sun. His laughter was soft and unhurried. He never seemed anxious, never in a rush. never weighed down, children came to sit near him when school was hard. Young men visited when their hearts had broken. Even adults, tired from the noise of being important, would wander up the forest path just to hear him speak a single sentence. And always he spoke without name. One day, a scholar arrived in the village. She had studied memory, identity, cognition. She had traveled widely, written papers, delivered lectures, when she heard of the nameless old man. Her curiosity lit like a match. She found him pruning his tomato plants. "You really don't remember your name?" she asked. He smiled. "I remember how the earth smells before rain. I remember the sound of night birds. I remember what peace feels like in the bones. But my name," he chuckled. "No, that I forgot a long time ago." "But a name is who you are," she said. "Is it?" He asked, gently. She frowned. "Without a name, who are you to others?" He tilted his head. "Who I am to others is not who I am." She paused. "Then who are you to yourself?" He placed a hand over his heart. Breath, stillness, a ripple. In the stream, gone before it's grasped. The scholar scribbled notes, frustrated. "But surely you once had ambition, goals, a title." "I had many names," he said. "Husband, teacher, son, even enemy, which was the real one." He looked up at the sky. "None, all, and also something else. There is a Zen story of a monk who, upon enlightenment, tore up every letter he had ever written and burned every certificate he had ever earned. When asked why, he replied, 'I have no interest in proof. I would rather be wind than resume.' In the West, we are taught to define ourselves by name, by occupation, by personality types and social roles. But in Zen, identity is fluid, not absent, but ungraspable, like water held in cupped hands. Touches everything, yet cannot be held. To forget one's name is not to lose one's self. It is to return to the self before the labels, the self that breathes, without being told how." The scholar stayed in the village for a week. Each day she returned to the old man, asking questions. He answered with silence, with gestures, with stories that looped and meandered like streams. On her final day, she asked him, "Aren't you afraid of being forgotten?" He smiled again, not in mockery, but in kindness. "If I am forgotten, what have I lost?" "Your legacy." He placed a fallen leaf in her palm. "Even this will feed the soil." Then he walked back into his garden. No name, no title, but more real than anyone she had ever met. In modern psychology, the self is often described as a construct. We piece it together from memories, experiences, feedback from others. But it is not fixed. It evolves, it contracts and expands. And when we cling too tightly to who we think we are, we suffer. The ego, craving certainty, says, "This is me, I must defend it." But the deeper self whispers, "I am more than I remember. More than I appear. I am the space where all this happens." To loosen our grip on identity is not to become lost. It is to become free. It is to remember that before the name, before the shame, before the achievements, we were simply presence, aware, alive, and enough. Months later, after the old man passed, away quietly in his sleep, the villagers gathered to honor him. There was no gravestone, only a tree planted in his memory. When asked what name to carve into the wood, the youngest child among them said, "Let's not give him one." Everyone agreed. They simply left the tree to grow. It became the tallest in the valley each spring. It flowered white, each autumn. Birds came to nest. No one remembered his name, but everyone remembered his peace. Tonight, if you feel uncertain of who you are, if you are tired of being the strong one, the broken one, the performer, the quiet one, remember, you are not your name, you are not your history, you are not even your thoughts, you are the breath behind. All that you are, the space that holds it all, and you don't need a name to be real. As the Buddha said, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Let yourself be the wind through the trees, the sound of the stream, the pause between two thoughts. Let yourself be nameless and free. 11. The fish that could not cry. There was a time when Keen didn't know how to cry. Not because he hadn't been hurt, he had. Not because his heart hadn't shattered, it had. But something inside him had grown so still, so disciplined, so armored, that when sorrow came knocking, it found no door. He was the dependable one, the responsible one, the one who always said, "I'm fine," even when he wasn't. From the outside, everything looked clean. His job was stable. His apartment was tidy. His words were measured. But deep beneath, where few could see, a silence had settled in him. Not the peace of meditation, not the calm of surrender, but the thick, unmoving stillness of emotional exile. He remembered the day his father died. People cried around him. His mother collapsed in the hall. His sister clutched a photo and wailed. But Keen only stood there, numb, dry-eyed. "Why aren't you crying?" Someone whispered. He didn't answer, because he didn't know he wanted to, or thought he did. But it was like reaching into a well that had long since dried. It wasn't that he didn't feel. It was that he had buried feeling so deep, even he couldn't find it. Years passed. Keen succeeded at many things. He climbed the ranks at work. He organized logistics with military precision. People came to him for advice, for structure, for solutions, but no one came to him for softness. No one asked him if he was lonely, until one day, a colleague left a note on his desk. Simple words, black ink, no name. It must be so heavy to never let anything spill. He stared at it for a long time. Then he folded it and placed it in his drawer. That night, he dreamed he was a fish, swimming endlessly in a deep ocean, clear and cold. He saw other fish, shimmering, laughing, crying. He tried to cry too, but nothing came. Not a tear, not a ripple, just the silent drift of someone who had forgotten how to grieve. He awoke with a dry throat and a weight in his chest, a longing he couldn't name. He took a leave from work, told no one where he was going, only that he needed air, and the air he sought led him to a monastery by the sea, a place someone had once mentioned in passing, a retreat where no one asked questions, and where silence was not a punishment but a prayer. The monks welcomed him with nods, gave him a room, a bowl, a cushion. No questions, no names, only presence. Days passed in ritual, waking with the bell, walking by the cliffs, eating in silence. Keen felt both lost and safe. There was no one to perform for, no tasks to complete, no image to maintain, but still no tears, not even during the evening chants, when others wept quietly, not even during walking meditation, when the sky turned orange and the sea whispered. To the stones, his heart felt like it was locked behind glass. He watched others weep and envied them, their release, their salt, their softness one morning. After zazen, he approached an old monk who sat by the koi pond, feeding the fish with rice flakes. "I feel like something's broken," Keen said. The monk looked up, eyes kind. I feel sadness, Keen continued, but I can't cry. It's like the well is sealed. The monk tossed another handful of rice into the water. The fish don't cry either, he said. Keen frowned. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be, the monk replied. It's just true. He paused. But maybe they don't need to, because the water carries everything for them. Keen looked at the pond. The fish moved slowly, gracefully, as if being held. But I don't feel held, he said. The monk nodded. Then maybe you must first let the water in. That night, Keen returned to his room and sat in the dark. He thought of all the times he had swallowed. Emotion at his father's funeral, when his best friend moved away in childhood, when the woman he had loved quietly stopped answering his messages. He thought of the nights he sat on the balcony with a beer and silence, not because he enjoyed it, but because it kept the ache at a distance. And then he whispered something he had never said aloud, I miss you, Dad. And the moment he said it, something cracked. Not loudly, but like a hairline fracture in glass, a small, almost invisible opening. His chest tightened, his breath shortened, but still no tears, only the pressure, the weight of years. The next morning, the monk handed him a bucket. We are going to the ocean, he said. They walked down the path, past the gate. Over the dune, the waves were quiet. The monk pointed. Fill the bucket, Keen did. Now carry it back. The water sloshed as they returned. At the edge of the garden, the monk said, pour it into the dry basin. Keen did again. They repeated the ritual 4 more times. On the 5th, Keen asked, why are we doing this? The monk replied, because the well in you is dry. He looked at Keen gently, and sometimes, to remember water, we must carry it. Keen said nothing, but something inside him softened. There is a Zen parable of a student who asked his master, why can't I cry? The master handed him a stone. Hold this, the student did. Then the master whispered, now let it go. The student dropped it. Did you need a reason to let go? The master asked. No. Then why do you demand one from your tears? The student cried for hours. Modern psychology tells us that many men, especially in patriarchal cultures, internalize the idea that emotion equals weakness. From a young age, they are told not to cry, not to feel, not to be soft. Over time, these messages become armor, but armor is heavy, and it isolates. Trauma is not always caused by violence. Sometimes it is the quiet starvation of not being allowed to express love, pain, tenderness. The nervous system learns to suppress, but what's buried is not gone. It waits, and healing is not the sudden flood, it is the first crack, the slow remembering, the bucket of water carried back to the soul, again and again, until the well opens. A week later, Keen sat by the sea. He had just finished his final chore scrubbing. The lanterns dot the wind picked up. Waves rose in soft crescents, he thought. Again of the fish, of the boy he used to be, of the man he had become, and without warning, without drama, without sound, tears came. They didn't fall in streams. They welled quietly, held in the eyes. Before finding their path down, he didn't sob. He simply breathed and let the salt come. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was something older than that, a return, a rain after drought, a remembering that evening. The monk found him sitting by the koi pond. I cried, Keen said. The monk smiled. Welcome back. Keen looked down at the water. "The fish still don't cry," he said. "But now I understand." The monk tilted his head. "Understand what?" Keen reached into the pond, touched the surface gently. "That I am not a fish. Tonight, if you have forgotten how to feel, if your sorrow has gone dry, and your chest feels like glass, know this. You are not broken. You are not incapable. You are only carrying too much that was never allowed to spill. The tears will come, not when you force them, but when you make room, as the Buddha said. With gentleness, overcome anger. With generosity, overcome meanness. With truth, overcome lies. And with tears, overcome forgetting. Let the well inside you open. Let the water return, not all at once, but enough to soften, enough to be held, enough to be held, enough to be real." 12. The Candle and the Hurricane, a small coastal village where the sea often kissed the earth too roughly. People learned to live with storms. Roofs were built low, windows shuttered from the inside, and every household had a candle not for light, but for prayer. The villagers believed that as long as a candle stayed lit during the worst night of the storm, the soul of the house would remain unbroken. Over the years, the storms grew stronger, but so did the silence inside each house. People lit their candles, whispered their fears, and waited in the dark. In the home of a boy named Hugh, the candle had always burned longest. His grandmother tended it with hands that trembled, but never failed. She called it her breathing fire. "Don't fight the wind," she would say. "Protect the flame." Hugh listened. As a child, he thought she meant literally, but as he grew older, he realized the candle meant something else. It was the breath of hope inside the chaos. When she passed away, the storms kept coming, but the light inside Hugh began to fade. He moved to the city when he was 20, said goodbye to the sea, to the storms, to the candle. In the city, storms didn't come from the sky. They came from deadlines, from failures, from fractured relationships. They arrived in emails and silences, in mistakes that echoed louder than thunder. He learned to cope, to work harder, to anticipate, to suppress. He kept the storm outside his face, but inside, something was flickering, a quiet burnout he didn't know how to name. One night, after losing a promotion he had chased for years, he found himself pacing his small apartment, hands shaking, unable to sleep. The city around him was loud, fast, blinking, but all he could think of was the candle. He had none now, just a hollow ache. He remembered his grandmother's voice. "Don't fight the wind. Protect the flame." But what flame, he thought. There's nothing left. Then the panic came, a quiet kind, like drowning under glass. His breath shallowed, his thoughts raced, and in that darkness, something inside him whispered, "Run." He didn't know where, or why, only that he had to go. Now, at dawn, he boarded a bus heading north. 3 hours later, he stood on the doorstep of a temple tucked against the shoulder of a mountain. The monk who answered said nothing, only opened the gate. "You bowed. I don't know what I'm doing here." The monk smiled. "Then you've come for the right reason." In the days that followed, Hugh adjusted to the rhythm of the temple. It was not the rhythm of retreat, it was the rhythm of return. Return to breath, to silence, to self, but still. He felt restless. Every time he sat on the cushion, his mind screamed. He tried harder to focus, to silence the noise, to conquer the chaos, But it only got louder, until one evening, during walking meditation beneath the trees, he collapsed onto a bench and whispered, "I can't do this." The old monk approached, sat beside him. "Tell me," he said. "My mind is a storm," Hugh confessed. "No matter how much I try to quiet it, it gets worse." The monk nodded slowly. "Perhaps the problem," he said, "is that you are trying to be the candle." Hugh looked up. "What do you mean?" The monk tilted his head toward the valley. "When the hurricane comes, it does not ask for stillness. It swallows it. If you try to be a fragile flame in the middle of such force, you will burn out." Hugh frowned. "Then what should I be?" The monk smiled. "The space that holds the hurricane." There is a Zen story of a student who asked the master, "How do I stay calm in chaos?" The master said, "Trying to stay calm is the chaos." The student replied, "But I need peace." The master brought him a candle and a bell. He struck the bell, and wind blew the candle out. "Now," said the master, "listen. Did the bell try not to ring? Did the wind try not to blow? Did the flame fight the air?" "No," the student said. The master smiled. "Then why must you fight the storm inside you?" In modern psychology, this lesson is echoed in the understanding of emotional regulation. The more we resist our emotions, the more we label anger as bad, sadness as weakness, anxiety as failure, the more these emotions grow. The nervous system is not soothed by suppression, it is soothed by safety. And safety does not come from control, it comes from capacity, the capacity to be with what arises without needing to fix it, to expand around discomfort, rather than collapse within it. This is mindfulness, not forcing the water to be still, but letting the pond be large enough for the ripples. In the days that followed, Hugh stopped trying to silence the storm. Instead, he noticed it with curiosity, with breath. He stopped gripping during meditation, stopped clenching when old thoughts returned. He learned to sit as the witness, not the flame, but the air around the flame, not the scream, but the space where the scream echoes. And in that space, something shifted. He wasn't calmer. He was deeper, not quieter, but freer. One afternoon, a storm rolled through the valley. The wind howled, trees bent, rain slammed the roof tiles. You sat on the porch, watched the trees move, and whispered, "Welcome." Before he left the temple, the monk gave him a gift, a candle, not a symbolic one, a simple, hand-dipped taper. "Take it with you," the monk said, "but only light it when you stop trying to stay lit." Hugh understood. He returned to the city. His job to his same apartment. But he was not the same now when panic rose. He did not run, he stayed. He breathed. He said, "This too is allowed." He was not a candle anymore. He was the sky. And sometimes he still burned out, but he no longer feared it, because he had become the space around the fire, and that space was infinite. Tonight, if your thoughts are racing, if your body is tense, if your breath feels too small for what you carry, do not need to quiet the storm. You only need to stop trying. To be the flame. You are not the fragile light. You are not the thought. You are the space, the awareness, the stillness that does not break. When the wind comes, as the Buddha said, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. Let go of the thinking, become the becoming. And sleep, not as the one trying to hold on, but as the one who has already let go. 13. The tree that died standing. They said the tree had never fallen. It stood on the edge of the southern hillside, near the ridge that caught the last of the afternoon sun. Tall, firm, unmoving. Even after it died, no one knew exactly when it passed. There were no broken branches, no dry snap of collapse. The leaves had simply stopped appearing one spring. The bark turned pale. The roots began to loosen, but it remained upright, even in death. It stood like a soldier who had forgotten how to surrender. People in the nearby village called it the Proud One. They admired it at first. A tree that defied decay, a symbol of strength, something to aspire to. But eventually, admiration gave way to discomfort, because no birds came to nest in it, no insects sang in its trunk, no breeze rustled its limbs. It was a monument, not a living thing, and when it rained, the water didn't soak in, it slid off, as if even the sky couldn't reach what refused to be touched. You arrived at the village during the rainy season. She came from the north, looking for silence, for soil, for something that felt like breath. She had left behind a life full of sharp edges, a career that looked beautiful on the outside, but felt hollow inside, a relationship that had ended with more silence than words. Therapist had asked, "What are you hoping to find?" She had answered, "Myself, I think." But what she really wanted was something simpler. She wanted to feel again, too. Feel something real. She rented a room by the field, spent her mornings walking the hill trails. It was on one of these walks that she first noticed the tree. At first, it looked alive, imposing, towering. But when she stepped closer, she saw the truth. It was dead entirely and still. Standing, she visited it often, not out of fascination, but because it reminded her of something she couldn't yet name. Each time she came, she sat by its roots, her back against the hollow base, and listened. She imagined what it must be like to die slowly, but never collapse, to be seen as strong, but feel empty, to carry the appearance of life, but no longer let anything in. And in that recognition, something ached inside her, because that was how she had lived for years, composed, accomplished, upright, but numb. One afternoon, she asked the village monk about the tree. He was sweeping the temple path when she approached. "It's still there," she said. "Still standing. How is that possible?" The monk looked toward the hill. "Because it hasn't let go yet," he said. She frowned. "But it's already dead." "Not completely," he replied. "The body can die long after the spirit has left. And sometimes pride holds up what nature is trying to lay down." They walked in silence for a while. Then she asked, "Is it wrong to be proud?" The monk smiled gently. "No, but it is dangerous when pride prevents surrender, when the refusal to fall becomes the refusal to feel." She looked at the path beneath her feet. "I think I've been like that tree." The monk placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then maybe it's time to let yourself lie down." There is a Zen story about a man who carried a large rock on his back everywhere he went. When asked why, he said, "It's to remind me I must be strong." But he aged faster than others. His body weakened. His spirit dimmed. One day a child asked, "What will happen if you set it down?" The man didn't answer. He simply began to cry, and the rock slipped from his shoulders like a sigh that had waited a lifetime to be breathed. In psychology, we call this emotional arming. It happens when we learn through trauma, through culture, through upbringing, that vulnerability is dangerous, that to cry is to break, that to admit exhaustion is to fail. And so we build defenses. We stand tall, We smile when we want to scream. We keep going when everything inside us begs to stop. But the cost of standing tall too long is that we forget how to kneel, how to soften, how to allow the world to hold us. Rather than always holding it, we become trees that die, standing and willing to fall. Even when rest is what we need most. Thu returned to the tree the next morning. It had rained the night before. The ground was soft, the roots exposed. She sat by it again. This time, she didn't lean on it. She placed her hands on the earth and whispered, "You don't have to stand anymore." She wasn't sure who she was speaking to, the tree, herself, her mother, or something deeper. But it didn't matter. Something in the air shifted. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, her shoulders dropped. She exhaled, not just air, but expectation. And for the first time, the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, but warm, honest, like rain after drought. And she didn't stop them. She let them fall. She let herself fall, not in collapse, but in return to gravity, to ground, to truth. She left the village. A week later, the tree remained, still standing, but now she saw it differently, not as a warning, but as a memory of who she used to be and who she no longer needed to be. Tonight, if you feel like you've been strong too long, if your body is tired, but your mask won't slip, if your heart is still, but your posture refuses to bend, know this. You do not have to die standing. You can lie down, you can rest, you can weep, you can say, "I don't want to be the strong one tonight," and nothing in you will break. In fact, something in you may finally begin to grow again. As the Buddha said, to rest is to renew. Even the tree bows to the wind. Let yourself bow, let yourself breathe, let yourself return, and sleep not as a monument, but as a field, soft and open, waiting for rain. 14. Why the moon smiled was just past dusk when the boy asked his question. He sat on the monastery steps, arms around his knees, chin tilted toward the sky. The lanterns had been lit, the wind was cool, and the moon, large and quiet, was rising from the mountains like it had done every night for thousands of years. The old monk stood nearby, sweeping the stone path in long, slow arcs. "Why does the moon never get tired of being second?" the boy asked. The monk paused. "Second," he echoed. The boy pointed. "It's always behind the sun, less bright, less important. People don't pray to the moon. They wait for sunrise, not moonrise." He looked down, voice softening. "I feel like the moon." The monk leaned his broom against the wall and sat beside him. "What makes you feel that way?" he asked gently. The boy picked at a thread in his robe. "My brother is like the sun, loud, confident. Everyone notices when he walks into a room. But mine quieter. I think more than I speak. At school, they praise him. At home, they expect me to be like him." He paused. "But I'm not, and sometimes I wish I were." The monk looked up at the moon. It was nearly full now, bright but not blinding, gentle in its watchfulness. "Would you like to know a secret?" the monk said. The boy nodded. Double quotes, "The moon never wanted to be the sun." That night, the boy dreamt. He was the moon. He floated high above the world, soft and silver. Below him, oceans shimmered. Mountains cast shadows like brushstrokes. He glided silently, bathing the sleeping world in pale light. Then he heard a voice. Brighter, it said. "Shine brighter," he tried, but he couldn't. Faster. It said, "Warm them, wake them, feed their crops. He couldn't. I'm not the sun, he whispered. And in that moment, the clouds parted, and the earth looked up not with demand, but with wonder. The animals stirred in peace. The lovers held hands under his light. The wolves howled, not in fear, but in reverence, and the moon him smiled, because he realized he was not meant to blaze. He was meant to glow in the morning. The boy returned to the steps. The monk poured him tea. They sat in silence until the boy said, "I don't want to be the sun anymore." The monk nodded. "Then perhaps now," he said, "you can learn to be the moon." The boy looked up. "What does that mean?" The monk smiled. "It means learning to shine in your own way, even when no one notices. There is a Zen story about two lamps, one that burned bright in the center of the village, and one that flickered gently in a distant cave. People gathered around the bright lamp. They sang, they told stories, they gave it names. No one visited the cave, but deep in that cave, someone grieving sat alone, and by the light of the smaller lamp, they found warmth. Later, when asked which lamp was more important, the master said, the one that did not need to be. In modern life, the pressure to shine like the sun is constant. Be bold, be visible, be extraordinary. We are told to brand ourselves, to impress, to achieve loudly. But not all light comes from brilliance. Some comes from presence, from listening instead of speaking, bored from comforting instead of commanding, from simply being who you are without apology. Psychologically, this is the difference between external validation and internal worth. When we chase approval, we lose connection, but when we accept our nature, we become powerful in a different way, not through force, but through quiet authenticity. The boy began to change, not into someone louder, but into someone truer. He stopped comparing his laughter to his brother's, stopped trying to speak just to be heard. He paid more attention to the sky, to the way the moon changed each night, sometimes full, sometimes hidden, but always itself. He realized the moon was not Constantian, yet never questioned its value. So why should he? He began drawing in a notebook, sketching phases of the moon, moments of silence, moments of feeling, not for anyone else, just for him, and with each page, he felt more whole. One evening, months later, the monk found the boy on the same steps. He was older now, taller. The moon hung high again, as it always did, still watching. The monk asked. The boy nodded. "But I don't feel smaller anymore." The monk sat beside him. "What do you feel instead?" The boy thought for a while. "I feel enough." Then added, "I still think of my brother sometimes. I still get jealous. But now I just let it pass." The monk closed his eyes. "Even the moon waxes and wanes," he said. "Even contentment comes and goes, but the sky remains." They sat in silence as the moon climbed higher. "Tonight, if you feel unseen, if your voice feels small in a loud world, if you wonder whether your quiet light matters, remember, the moon is not lesser than the sun. It is simply different, and difference is not deficiency. It is design. You do not need to speak louder. You do not need to be someone else's idea of bright. You can glow, you can witness, you can move tides with your presence alone, as the Buddha once said. Just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life. Let that flame be quiet. Let your moon rise, and sleep tonight, not in the shadow of someone else's light, but in the gentle rhythm of your own. 15. The Sparrow and the Bell Tower. The bell tower hadn't rung in decades. It stood in the middle of the monastery courtyard, rising tall above the tiled roofs and winding stone paths. The bell inside was massive, cast from bronze, so thick it could sing across mountains. But time had silenced it. The monks said the last to strike it had passed away long ago, and no one had touched the rope since, not out of fear, out of reverence. Some sounds are too sacred to repeat. The young man who arrived one spring knew none of this. His name was Nam. He had come to the monastery not seeking truth, but escape. A quiet burnout from city life, a recent breakup, a series of dreams deferred, or broken altogether. He didn't want to think. He wanted to disappear into quiet. He had imagined the monastery as a place of peace, but he found something strange, a stillness, and in that stillness his thoughts didn't vanish. They shouted at night. He lay awake on his straw mat, thoughts crashing through his skull. At dawn, he swept the courtyard with trembling hands, unsure what use he was. The other monks said little, smiled softly, moved slowly. Nam envied them. How do they live like this? He wondered, how do they not go mad in the silence? One morning, after a restless night, Nam wandered into the bell tower. The stairs groaned under his weight as he climbed. At the top, he stood before the bell. Dust lay thick along its rim. Spider had spun a small web across the wooden mallet. He stared at the bell for a long time, and then, without touching it, he asked aloud, "What do you know that I don't?" He didn't expect an answer, but something stirred in the rafters. A sparrow, startled by his voice, fluttered down and landed on the beam beside the bell. It stared at him. He stared back. "I'm not who I wanted to be," Nam said. The sparrow didn't move. "I keep chasing meaning, and all I get is exhaustion." Still, the bird remained. "I tried so hard," he whispered, "and I don't even know what I was trying for anymore." The sparrow blinked, and in that moment, the bell shifted slightly in the wind. It didn't ring, not truly, but something in it breathed. A soft hum, a vibration so low he felt it more than heard it. He held his breath, and the sparrow began to sing, not loudly, just a few notes. Then it flew away. Nam stood there for a long time, not because something had happened, but because something had not, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel empty. He felt still. That evening, he approached the head monk. "I went to the bell tower," Nam said. The monk nodded. "There was a sparrow," Nam added. "It sang." The monk looked up at the darkening sky. "Sometimes the bell needs silence before it can teach." Nam hesitated. "What does that mean?" The monk replied. "Not every sound must be loud to be heard. There is a Zen story of a man who sought enlightenment in the form of a THUNDER CLAP. He waited for a voice from the sky, a flash of cosmic wisdom instead. He spent years in a monastery sweeping leaves, boiling rice, sitting in silence. One morning, as he washed a cup, he heard a single drop of water fall into the basin, and something opened inside him. He began to cry, not for sorrow, but because he realized the answer had always been quiet. He had simply been too loud to hear it. In modern life, we associate value with volume. Louder voices, bigger impact, faster success. We believe that meaning must announce itself clear, bold, unmistakable. But most true transformations arrive like the sparrow. Soft. UNBIDDEN. In the spaces between thoughts. Psychologically, this is the principle of liminal experience. Moments when the conscious mind lets go of control and something deeper surfaces, not through analysis, but through surrender, not through doing, but through presence. Nam began to change after that day, not dramatically, but consistently. He stopped rushing through chores. He listened more. Even when no one was speaking, he began to feel the difference between silence and quiet. Silence was the absence of noise. Quiet was the presence of space. One morning, he sat at the base of the bell tower and waited, not for anything, just to wait. A child from the nearby village came and sat beside him. "Why doesn't the bell ring?" the child asked. Nam smiled. "It's listening." That night, a windstorm moved through the hills. Branches cracked. Clouds gathered. Rain lashed the roof. Nam lay in his cell, breathing, and in the distance, just before dawn, he thought he heard a deep vibration. The bell. No, just thunder, or maybe something else. Not every sound can be named. Some are meant only to be felt. Weeks later, Nam left the monastery. He returned to the city. But he did not return the same. He walked slower, spoke less, listened more. He found that the world had not changed, but he had, and that made all the difference. He no longer needed to chase meaning. He had become a place where it could land like a sparrow on a beam, like a bell waiting to breathe. Tonight, if your life feels too loud, if you find yourself waiting for something grand, something that shakes the sky, remember, not all awakenings arrive with thunder. Some come with wings, with breath, with the pause between two thoughts. You do not need to ring, you do not need to echo, you only need to listen. As the Buddha said, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Let your silence be that word. Let your stillness be the bell. Let your breath be the sound. The sparrow heard, and sleep tonight not in noise, but in listening. 16. The broken sandal by the river. The sandal broke on the 4th day of the journey. It happened just after dawn, on the northern edge of the river trail. Min had been walking since sunrise, his pack light, his steps careful. He hadn't planned the walk, it had simply begun one morning, when the silence in his apartment grew too loud. He locked the door, slung the old canvas bag across his back, and started walking. He wasn't escaping anything in particular, just the weight of too many small things, responsibilities, conversations, unread messages, a life that looked fine from the outside but didn't feel like anything from within. At first, the walk was a relief. The rhythm of footsteps, the sound of water nearby, the simplicity of deciding only where to sleep and when to drink. But on the 4th morning, as he stepped across a stretch of damp stone, the strap on his right sandal snapped. He stood still, looked down. It didn't feel dramatic, just inconvenient. He knelt, tried to tie it back together with a piece of string. It held, then snapped again 10 steps later. He sighed. He had brought no spare, no tape, no tools, and now one sandal flopped loosely at his ankle, while the other remained firm. He tried walking with both. Uneven, he tried walking barefoot. Neither felt right, and slowly frustration rose, not loud, but familiar. This always happens, he thought. When things are going okay, something small breaks, something minor, but just enough to unravel the piece. He sat down on a rock by the river and stared at the broken sandal. It wasn't just the strap, it was what it represented. He had worked hard to prepare this trip, had thought through every detail, had imagined peace, stillness, a kind of walking meditation that might bring him clarity. But now, a piece of rubber and fabric had interrupted all that. It was ridiculous, and yet it made him angry. Not big anger, just the kind that whispers, "See, nothing ever stays whole." He picked up the sandal, stared at it like it owed him something. Then, quietly, he threw it into the river, watched it float away, and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because, in that moment, something let go, not just the sandal, something. Inside him, he walked barefoot the rest of that day. At first, the ground was sharp, pebbles, twigs, the occasional sting, but his pace slowed, his senses sharpened. He noticed the temperature of the earth changing beneath his feet. He noticed where the grass grew cooler, where the soil softened. He noticed the sound of birds not just above him, but around him. And for the first time since the journey began, he wasn't walking to get anywhere. He was simply walking. That night, he arrived at a small rest hut by the riverbank. It was empty except for an old man sitting on the edge, sipping tea from a tin cup. The man looked down at Min's feet. "You're missing something," he said. "I was," Min replied. "But maybe not anymore." The old man smiled. "Some things are only broken so we can walk differently." Min sat beside him. "What do you mean?" The man pointed at the river. "Do you see how it moves?" "Yes." "Now tell me what in it is trying to be perfect." Min said nothing. The man sipped his tea. "The river flows not because it's flawless," he said. "It flows because it doesn't resist." Min looked down at his dusty feet and felt the truth of it. There is a Zen story about a monk who prized his robe above all else. It was clean, untouched, a symbol of his discipline. One day, while walking through the forest, the robe caught on a branch and tore. The monk froze. Years of discipline collapsed in a single moment of rage. He shouted at the tree. He cursed his clumsiness. He sat down and wept not for the robe, but for the illusion he had clung to. Later, his teacher found him and said, "Now that your robe is torn, you may finally begin." Modern psychology speaks of perfectionism as a coping mechanism. It often begins in childhood as a way to earn love, to control chaos, to feel safe. But over time, it becomes a trap. We attach our worth to how smoothly things go, to how unbroken our sandals are, to how seamless our plans unfold. And when something fails, no matter how small, it feels like the whole self has failed. But healing begins not when things go right. It begins when we learn to stay present. When they don't, when we walk barefoot, slowly, when we stop demanding that life stay clean, and instead we learn to feel the earth the next morning. Min woke to the sound of birds and water. His feet were sore, but his body felt light. He stood at the edge of the river, toes curled into the cool soil. He thought of all the things he had tried to hold together in life, all the moments he had tried to tape himself back into shape, all the times he had told himself, "Just keep walking. Don't let anything fall apart." And now he had let one thing fall apart, and nothing had ended. In fact, something had begun. He didn't regret throwing the sandal away, because it had taught him something no book ever had, that sometimes wholeness is not in keeping things intact. It's in learning to walk differently when they break. It's in becoming the kind of person who can lose something and still continue with less. He reached the next village, barefoot. No one stared, no one questioned him. He bought a new pair of sandals but kept walking slowly, deliberately, as if his soul still remembered the feel of the earth, and in some quiet way, they did tonight. If something small has gone wrong, if a plan has failed, if something you depended on has broken, if a tiny inconvenience has pierced your peace, pause, breathe, and ask, what if this is not a mistake? What if this is the moment to walk differently? You are not fragile because things fall apart. You are wise when you stop chasing perfection. As the Buddha said, if you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will be free. Tonight, let the sandal float, let the path soften, let your feet remember how to feel and walk, not with fear but with presence. 17. The cat that stared too long. Cat sat in the window every day at the same hour, just as the afternoon light slid across the tiled floor of the meditation hall. The tabby would climb onto the ledge, curl its tail neatly and stare. It did not blink. It did not meow. It simply looked out, fixed, intent, as if the horizon held something too important to miss. The novice monks found it amusing. Look at her, one would whisper. She's more focused than we are. Others nodded, half in jest, half in awe. She's in samadhi, someone joked. Deep concentration. And in truth, the cat never seemed distracted. Not by birds, not by the wind, not even by the clatter of bowls during evening chores. She stared as if the world beyond the window was her only object of awareness. But after a few weeks, something shifted. The cat began to grow thinner. She moved less. A small cut on her ear went unnoticed, unlicked, and still she stared. The abbot, noticing the change, placed a bowl of milk nearby. The cat didn't drink it. He placed it closer, still. She stared. One morning, the cat collapsed on the sill, her body folding into itself like a forgotten cloak. The monks buried her under the plum tree. No one made jokes. Only silence remained, as if the stillness she had carried had now returned to the earth. The story stayed with one of the young monks, Lynn. Long after the others moved on, he was the one who had watched the cat most closely. He had admired her focus, her stillness, the way she seemed detached from distraction, immune to the pull of life's ordinary chaos. He had tried to mimic her during meditation. He had stared, unmoving, for hours. He had taught himself not to fidget, not to react, not even to think. But now, he wondered, had the cat found peace, or had she forgotten to live? He asked the abbot one evening as they swept the garden path. I thought she was enlightened, Lynn said. The abbot stopped sweeping. Perhaps, he said, she was only stuck. Lynn frowned. But isn't stillness the goal? The abbot leaned on his broom. Stillness is the ground, but life still moves. There is a Zen story of a man who sat in a cave for 9 years, unmoving, seeking absolute detachment. One day, a child passed by and asked, "What are you waiting for?" The man said, "For my thoughts to stop." The child blinked. "Do your lungs wait to breathe?" The man opened his eyes and left the cave the next morning, not because he had failed, but because he realized silence is not escape, it is preparation. Liam began to sit differently after that. He no longer forced his body into statues, no longer chased emptiness. He listened to the birds, to the wind, to his own heart. He noticed that true awareness wasn't staring, it was softening, it was being fully here, not above life, but within it, not an escape from the world, but an embrace of it. He began helping more in the kitchen. He smiled when he passed others in the garden. He didn't sit for hours anymore. He sat for moments that mattered, and in those moments, he was more present than ever. One afternoon, while tending the herbs near the base of the plum tree, Lynn found a feather, small, pale grey, tucked between the roots. He placed it on the altar. No words, just offering, just breath, just being. Modern mindfulness often gets distorted into performance. We mistake stillness for stiffness. We believe that calm must look like detachment. We forget that awareness includes feeling, that presence includes pain, and that to be awake is not to float above the world, but to touch it more deeply. Psychology calls this spiritual bypassing, the attempt to use spiritual practice to avoid difficult emotions. It may look peaceful on the surface, but it disconnects us from growth. True practice is not about escaping discomfort. It's about holding it with compassion and then acting from love, not fear. The cat became a story told. Two new novices, not as a warning, not as a joke, but as a reminder that meditation is not the point. Life is, and the purpose of silence is not to escape sound. It is to hear more clearly, to live more gently, to love more fully. Years later, Lynn became a teacher. He taught meditation with humor, with warmth. He told students not to lock themselves into stillness. He told them to move when their legs ached, to cry when tears rose, to speak when their hearts had something kind to say. One student asked him once, "Master, what was your greatest lesson?" He smiled, a cat that stared too long. Then he bowed toward the window where light and leaves and movement always returned. Tonight, if you find yourself lost in seeking, if you are trying to be still, but feel stuck, if you are trying to be perfect, but feel lifeless, pause, breathe. Remember, you are not here to disappear. You are here to be to feel, to laugh, to hurt, to soften, to fall in love with a moment, even when it trembles. As the Buddha said, there is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path. So walk, touch, feel the wind, and let stillness be a door, not a destination. 18. The gate that asked nothing. The gate stood at the end of a long stone path. Not high, not ornate, just two wooden posts and a beam, weathered smooth by wind and time. Moss curled around its base. Ivy laced its edges. It bore no sign, no words, no lock, and yet people feared it, because no one knew what waited. Beyond, some said it led to a hidden temple, others claimed it opened into silence. Many passed it by, glancing sideways, but never stepping through. Only one thing was certain: the gate never stopped anyone. It did not open or close. It simply stood, as if waiting, as if listening, as if already knowing. Tuan had walked past it a dozen times. He came to the mountain every year when the noise of his life grew unbearable. He called it a retreat, but in truth it was a form of hiding. He didn't bring friends. He left his phone in the glove box. He hiked the same trail, ate the same food, wrote the same thoughts in the same old notebook. But this time was different. This time, something inside him felt heavier. He had lost someone, not to death, but to distance. Words unsaid, faults unacknowledged. A love he hadn't known how to hold until it slipped. Beyond reach, he walked for hours, let his feet guide him, and when he reached a familiar bend in the trail, there it was, the gate. He stood before it, and finally he stepped through. He expected change, a shift in air, A sound, a whisper, but there was nothing. Just forest, just the crunch of leaves underfoot, just a path that wound downward into stillness. He followed it. The trail curved gently until it opened into a small clearing. There was a bench, a stream, a single plum tree, and an old man sitting with his back to the sun. The man looked up, as if he had been expecting him. "Welcome," he said. "To where?" Tuan asked. The man smiled. "To this." They sat in silence. Tuan tried to make sense of it. There was no temple, no lesson, no chant, just this clearing, this bench, this quiet. "I thought there would be more," he said finally. The man nodded. "There always is," he replied, "but only when you stop needing it." Tuan looked down. "I've made mistakes," he said, "and I keep looking for a place that will forgive me." The man leaned back. "The gate you passed through," he said, "asks nothing. It does not judge. Your shoes, your posture, your past. It only welcomes." Tuan frowned. "But I don't feel forgiven." "That's because you still believe forgiveness must be earned," the man said. "Here, it is not." He pointed to the stream. "Watch." A single leaf floated down from the tree. It landed gently in the water. The current took it effortless, unconcerned. It did not resist. It did not demand. It did not explain itself. It was simply carried. "This," the man said, "is grace." There is a Zen story of a monk who traveled thousands of miles to seek enlightenment. He crossed rivers, climbed mountains, faced hunger and loneliness. At last, he reached a cave where a great master lived. "I have come for the teaching," the monk said. The master said nothing, just pointed behind him. The monk turned. There was a gate, the same one he had passed at the beginning of his journey. "You could have entered at any time," the master said, "but I wasn't ready." "No," the master replied, "you weren't willing." Tuan sat by the stream until the light faded. He didn't ask more questions. He had no answers, only breath, only presence, only the strange peace that comes when nothing is required of you, not goodness, not clarity, not strength, just being. He rose to leave. The old man nodded once and said, "The gate will be there again." Tuan paused. "What if I forget what I felt here?" The man looked at him gently. "You will, and when you do, the gate will still not ask anything." In modern psychology, many people seek healing through performance. They try to be better. To prove they are no longer broken. They go to therapy with a to-do list. They meditate with expectations. But healing doesn't come from effort alone. It comes from the absence of resistance. From being received without having to earn it. We are not used to that. We're taught that love is conditional, that peace must be deserved. But there is a deeper current, a stream that carries without asking why, a gate that welcomes because it was never closed. This is radical acceptance, not in theory, but in practice. You sit with your flaws, you breathe with your shame, and still, the world holds you. Still, the air enters your lungs. Still, the sky does not withdraw its light. Tuan never forgot the gate again. He didn't talk about it, didn't write about it. But when his thoughts grew tight, when his guilt began to return, he pictured it simple, wooden, asking nothing, and sometimes just that image was enough to soften his chest, to bring him back to the breath, to the moment, to this tonight. If you are tired of trying, if you are looking for the perfect apology, the perfect fix, the perfect version of yourself, Pause. You have already arrived. There is a gate in you that does not ask for improvement. It only asks for your presence. As the Buddha said, come, see for yourself. No password, no explanation, just this step, just this silence, just this moment. Let yourself in, let yourself rest, let the world welcome you just as you are. 19. The monk who lost his voice. No one remembered the exact day the monk stopped speaking. He had once been known for his words, sharp, poetic, filled with clarity. When he gave teachings, people traveled far to hear him. His voice had rhythm, like water striking stone. Each phrase landed with intention. People said he could make silence itself sound articulate. And then, one morning, he simply stopped. He didn't announce it. He didn't vow silence. He just stopped using his voice. He bowed instead of answering, gestured instead of explaining, smiled instead of interrupting. At first, the community was confused. Some were offended, others concerned, but the monk remained calm day after day. He chopped vegetables with the novices, swept the garden, sat in the meditation hall without a word, not cold, not withdrawn, present, but voiceless. Years passed. The monk became something of a legend. Visitors came to test him. One man shouted insults. The monk listened and offered tea. Another begged for advice. The monk led him to a stream and pointed at the current. Some thought him enlightened, others thought him broken. He offered no correction to either view. He simply lived, like a tree that no longer bloomed, but still offered shade. Among the novices was a young man named Tao. He had grown up in noise, the noise of a crowded home, the noise of a mind always afraid of being wrong. He had come to the monastery, seeking stillness, but silence frightened him. He filled his time with tasks, scrubbed harder than necessary, chanted louder than required, until one day the abbot said, "Spend a week with the silent monk." Tao hesitated. "What will I learn?" The abbot only smiled. "Perhaps how to hear." Tao joined the silent monk in the early hours. They fetched water together, carried wood, ate without speaking. At first, Tao tried to fill the silence in his mind with imagined conversations. He asked questions internally and imagined wise answers, but the monk never spoke, only looked gently, only moved with precision. Tao began to notice things. The way the monk waited for the kettle to whistle, not impatiently, but attentively. The way his hands moved through air like calligraphy. The way his eyes listened, even when no sound was made. Tao began to soften, not because he had answers, but because he no longer demanded them. On the 5th day, they walked to the old pond near the edge of the forest. The monk sat beneath the willow tree and began to draw lines in the sand with a stick. Tao sat beside him, watching. Then, without thinking, he asked, "Why don't you speak?" The monk paused, but did not look up. He drew one more circle, then placed the stick down. They sat in stillness. Tao flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The monk turned to him and smiled. Then, for the first time in many years, he spoke, just one sentence. Some things become clear only when nothing is said. Then he closed his eyes and said no more. That night, Tao couldn't sleep. He sat outside his cell under the stars. Remembering the voice, it had been quiet, warm, and in its scarcity. It echoed louder than any speech. He began to wonder how often had he spoken to defend his own image. How many times had he interrupted silence out of fear, not insight? He remembered childhood arguments, explanations he had crafted, just to avoid blame, words he'd thrown like shields. Now he saw what the monk had meant. Some truths can only surface in stillness, not because words fail, but because they sometimes get in the way. There is a Zen story of a teacher who remained silent for 30 years. When asked why, he said, "Words are like footsteps on thin ice. One too many, and we fall through." Later, in his old age, when a student wept beside him, he placed a hand on her back and said, "I waited 30 years to say one true thing." Then he whispered, "You are already whole." In modern life, silence is often misinterpreted. It's seen as absence, as awkwardness. But, in truth, silence is full. It is the space where insight grows. The nervous system heals in silence. The brain, deprived of constant stimulus, begins to reorder itself in therapeutic practice. A counselor's silence can be more healing than interpretation, because it invites trust, because it leaves room for the person to hear themselves. True listening requires stillness, not just in sound, but in agenda, in ego, in response. Tao stayed at the monastery for many years. He became known not for his teachings, but for his listening. Visitors said that even sitting beside him made them feel understood. He didn't always speak, but when he did, it was with care, and it was enough. One day, a young novice asked him, "Why do you pause before speaking?" Tao smiled, "Because I want to make sure it's not fear that's answering." Then he stood, and they walked in silence. As for the monk who had once lost his voice, he died in his sleep, under the same willow tree where he had spoken his one sentence at his funeral. No eulogy was read, no biography recited. Only a single bowl was placed on the altar, empty, and beside it a bell that no one rang. The silence said everything tonight. If your mind is loud, if you are full of explanations, defenses, stories you've told too many times, pause. You do not need to answer everything. You do not need to speak to be heard. Let the silence inside you deepen. Let the space between thoughts grow wider. You are not incomplete because you cannot explain yourself. You are not invisible because you are quiet. As the Buddha said, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. And sometimes that word is no word at all. Let your breath be enough. Let your presence be your voice, and sleep, not with the need to be understood, but with the knowing that you already are. 20. The well in the desert. He had been walking for days. Sun above, sand below, nothing but wind and the crackle of heat stretching across the dunes. The water in his bottle had long since turned warm. He took small sips, rationed each swallow. Each step was a negotiation with fatigue. His name was Jiang. He didn't know exactly why he had come to the desert. He only knew that something in him was parched. Not just the body, but something deeper, something old. A thirst that couldn't be quenched by rest, or food, or human touch. Back in the city, things had unraveled slowly. The job he'd poured himself into had let him go. The relationship he had hoped would ground him dissolved without ceremony. The friends who once checked in stopped calling. He wasn't angry, just empty. So he left, bought a bus ticket that led to nowhere in particular, and found himself wandering between ancient hills of sand. He told himself he was looking for something, a sin, a silence. A well. On the 5th day, he collapsed near a low ridge, his feet swollen, his skin cracked, his thoughts turning sluggish and circular. "I'm lost," he whispered into the sand. His voice barely stirred the air. He closed his eyes. The heat pulsed through him. He waited for something to give his strength, his breath, the earth. Instead, he heard a voice, not from above, not from outside, from within. The voice said, "Dig." He opened his eyes. No one around, only dunes and sky still. He sat up, moved a few feet to the side, and began to dig. His hands were raw, his fingers stiff. The sand was hot at first, then cooler, grain by grain. He dug until his breath grew shallow, then stopped and waited. Nothing, no water, no miracle, only a shallow hole and silence. He laughed bitterly. "Of course not," he said aloud. Then he lay beside the hole and slept. He dreamed of a well, a deep one. Stone walls, cool, shadows. He leaned over it, but instead of seeing water, he saw himself, not as he was now, broken and burned, but as a child, curious, alive, unafraid. The child looked up and said, "The well has always been here." Then he awoke to wind, to sand, to stillness, and to peace, not full, not loud, but quiet, settled, for the first time in months. His chest didn't ache. His breath felt like it belonged to him again. He sat up, touched the dry earth, and whispered, "Thank you." There is a Zen story of a man who searched for years across mountains and valleys, looking for the spring of eternal peace. He asked masters, traveled through storms, endured loneliness at last. On the verge of giving up, he sat under a tree, exhausted, and there, beneath him, a small stream surfaced from the rock. He cupped his hands, drank. The master later told him, "It was always here. You simply had to stop running long enough to find it." In modern psychology, the search for peace often mimics the desert. We reach for external cures, success, approval, certainty. We believe the well is somewhere else, that if we travel far enough through books, gurus, practices, we will find the thing that quenches the ache inside. But the nervous system does not settle through achievement. It settles through safety, through presence, through the moment, when we stop looking and simply feel. And in that pause, the well reveals itself, sometimes as memory, sometimes as breath, sometimes as a quiet debt finally feels safe. Jung didn't return to the city right away. He stayed near the desert edge for another week, resting, sitting, letting the stillness deepen. He spoke little, wrote less, but his body softened. The tension in his shoulders released. The constant loop of thoughts grew gentler. He no longer searched the horizon. Instead, he closed his eyes and listened inward. One morning, a traveler passed him. "Bye, you live here now?" The man asked. Jung smiled. "No," he said. "I just came here to remember where the water is." The man laughed. "And did you find it?" Jung looked down at his own hands. "Yes," he said, "but not where I expected." He eventually returned. Not to the same job, not to the same patterns. He moved more slowly now, spoke more deliberately. He didn't chase as much. He didn't reach outward as quickly. When friends asked what changed, he only said, "I learned how to dig where I stand." They didn't always understand, but they felt something different in him. Stillness that was not emptiness, a quiet that was not withdrawal, a kind of presence that held space for others, because he had found space within himself. Tonight, if you feel thirsty in ways water can't reach, if your life has become a dry plain of effort and noise, if you keep chasing something that always stays just out of reach. Pause, place your hands on your chest, close your eyes, and ask, what if the well isn't out there? What if it's already within me? As the Buddha said, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. You don't need to travel far. You don't need to fix everything first. You only need to stop, to listen, to dig gently, patiently, with your breath, and when the water rises not in floods, but in quiet sips, let it remind you, you were never empty, only waiting. 21. The wind chime remembers nothing. There was a wind chime that hung beneath the eaves of the old temple. 5 hollow tubes, brushed silver, suspended from a wooden disc, faded by sun and years. It swayed gently with the breeze, sounding not like music, but like breath, soft, brief, barely there. No one remembered who had hung it, or when, but it had always been there, whispering in the wind. The monks rarely spoke of it. It was simply part of the temple, like the moss on the stone steps, or the crack in the bell tower's base. Something always present, always sounding, but never drawing attention, except for Mai. She noticed that she had come to the temple that winter, carrying a satchel and the burden of memory. A woman in her 30s, quiet, alert, with eyes that scanned every corner. She moved with care, not reverence. Her presence was soft, but not relaxed. When asked her purpose, she only said, to sit, to forget. The abbot, old and kind-eyed, nodded without question. Some people come to learn, others come to remember, but a few come to forget, and all are welcome. Mai sat beneath the wind chime on her first morning. Not intentionally, she had wandered the courtyard, looking for a place that felt neither exposed nor hidden. She found the bench beneath the eaves. She sat, and the wind chime stirred. It sounded like a memory that had never quite formed. She closed her eyes and saw her father, saw the kitchen table, the old house, the way he used to whistle softly when slicing fruit. Then the sound became sharper, the arguments, the slammed doors, the things never said, and the words that had cut like stones in water. She opened her eyes. The chime stopped. The silence rushed. In 4 days. Mai returned to the same bench. She did not chant with the others. She did not join in chores. She watched, listened when the wind picked up. The chime rang when the air stilled. It fell silent, but never for long, and never predictably. She found herself both comforted and irritated by it. She wanted to control the sound. She wanted to anticipate it. But she COULDN, single quotes. And one day, when a sudden gust made the chimes sing loudly, during her meditation, she stood up and shouted, "Stop." The wind listened. The chime stilled. And for a long moment, she stood there, angry, exposed, ashamed. The abbot, passing by, said nothing. He simply walked to the chime, tapped it once with his finger. It rang, then swung gently again. "Sound is not memory," he said. "Then why does it feel like one?" she asked. "Because you are trying to remember through pain," he replied. She lowered her head. "I don't know how to let go." The abbot nodded, then let it come, let it pass. Like wind, he looked up at the chime. It remembers nothing, and yet it sings. That night, Mai couldn't sleep. She lay on the mat, eyes open. Breath shallow. Memories came again, but not in sequence, not like stories. They came like weather, a scent, a hand, a sentence unfinished. She had tried therapy, tried journaling, tried burning. Letters, still. The past clung to her like fog. She had thought forgetting would be like a door closing. But here, in the stillness of the temple, she was beginning to see forgetting wasn't ERAS, URE, it was release, letting the memory move through without building a house. Inside her like wind, through a chime that leaves no trace. There is a Zen story of a man who carried a bell wherever he went. He rang it every time he had a painful thought, to remember not to remember, but the bell became heavier. He rang it more often, until one day he met a teacher who asked, "Why do you need a bell to forget?" The man said, "Because my thoughts won't leave me alone." The teacher smiled. "And yet, you are the one who keeps ringing." Modern psychology teaches us that rumination, repeating memories over and over, is a coping mechanism. We relive moments not because we want to, but because the mind is trying to protect us from being hurt again. But memory is not always truth. It is often the echo of an emotion frozen in time. We believe that remembering is healing, but sometimes healing is not remembering less. It is identifying less with what was remembered, letting the memory exist and move on, like a breeze through an open room, like sound that rings but does not linger. My returned to the bench. She watched the wind chime. Differently now. She did not wait for it to sing. She did not flinch when it did. She simply listened, and one morning, while sipping tea beneath the eaves, she realized she hadn't thought of the argument in 2 days. The last time she'd seen her father, their last fight, the guilt, the words unsaid, they had softened, not disappeared, but loosened, and in that space, something else arrived. Compassion, not yet. Forgiveness, but the beginning of it. She breathed. The chime rang once, and she smiled before she left the temple. Mai walked to the abbot. "Thank you," she said. He bowed. She looked up at the chime. "It doesn't remember me." "No," he said, "and it never will." She nodded. "That's good." And with that, she walked away. Not lighter, but freer. There is a difference. One can float, the other can return. Tonight, if you are haunted by something you cannot change, if the past clings like smoke to your chest, if memory feels like a bell that keeps ringing, breathe. You do not have to force forgetting. You only have to stop making a home out of the echo. Let the sound come. Let it pass. Let the wind move through you without leaving shape. As the Buddha said, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. The wind chime is not broken. It is simply honest. It waits for no one and sings without memory. So can you sleep tonight. Not in forgetting, but in no longer needing to remember. 22. The spider and the prayer beads. Each morning, she sat at the altar. The beads in her hands moved slowly, one by one, through fingers that trembled slightly from age and reverence. Her lips moved in silence. Her eyes remained half closed. And when the chant was done, she would bow once, twice, 3 times, then sit still for a long time, as if listening for a reply. Her name was Han. She had lived alone for many years in a small wooden house near the temple, where the jasmine grew wild and the wind whispered through bamboo to those who knew her. She was a figure of devotion, always praying, always calm, always holding the beads, but inside her, something had begun to crack, not loudly, not suddenly, like a tiny fracture in porcelain, spreading slowly with every passing season, because no matter how many prayers she recited, no matter how long she sat, the silence remained heavy. UNMOVING. She had begun praying more after her son died, not tragically, not violently, just, quietly, a sickness that came and took him in his sleep. He had been 30-2, her only child. His absence was not a wound, was a hollow, and into that hollow she poured her chants, day after day, bead after bead. She told herself it was devotion, but some nights, alone in the dark, she wondered if it was bargaining. She never cried, she only prayed, until one morning, something changed. She found a spider on the altar. It had woven a web between the incense holder and the wooden Buddha, delicate, precise, almost beautiful. She frowned, reached to sweep it away, but paused. The spider was small, still breathing. Its presence felt like a trespass, but also like a message. She sat down, unsure, held her beads, began her chant, but the words caught her voice, usually steady, trembled. She looked at the spider again. It hadn't moved, and suddenly she wasn't sure why she was praying anymore. She let the beads fall into her lap and wept, not for her son. Not only she wept for all the mornings she had tried to earn peace, all the times she had chanted, instead of grieving, all the hours she had mistaken repetition for surrender. She whispered, "Is this enough?" The spider said nothing, but the web held dot. Later that day, she asked the abbot, "Do prayers work?" He looked at her gently. "They work as well as silence does," he said. She hesitated. "I'm afraid I've been praying to avoid pain." He nodded. "That is also a prayer." She frowned. "I thought prayer had to be pure." He smiled. "No, it only has to be honest." There is a Zen story of a man who prayed each day with incense and bells and perfect posture. One day, a storm knocked over his shrine. He cried, "How can I pray now?" A beggar nearby said, "With your breath, with your grief, with your next act of kindness." The man asked, "Is that allowed?" And the beggar said, "Who told you it wasn't?" In modern life, spirituality often becomes performance, a heat well, a sequence. Mask, we light candles, we chant mantras, we repeat affirmations, but we forget that the soul does not speak in perfect grammar. It sighs, it stutters, it sometimes goes silent. Prayer, at its core, is not a transaction. It is not asking for peace. It is sitting in the storm until peace finds us again. Psychologically, we know that healing requires presence, not perfection. The brain and heart respond more to authenticity than routine. When we let go of doing prayer right, we allow ourselves to be real, and being real is where healing begins. The next morning, Han returned to the altar. The spider was gone, but the web remained. She didn't clean it. She sat, she held the beads, but she didn't chant. She simply breathed, in, out, at each. Bead now felt different, not a tool, not a burden, just wood, just shape. She let them move through her fingers like breath, like time. And when she bowed, it wasn't for merit. It was for the mystery that something so small, so still had taught her what hundreds of prayers had not: to stop grasping, to start feeling, to weep, to wait, and to trust that silence is not the absence of divinity, but often its first language. That evening, a young monk came to sweep the altar. He paused at the web, looked to her. She nodded once. "Leave it." He smiled and moved on. Weeks passed. The spider never returned. The web slowly unraveled, but something in her had rewoven itself. She prayed less often, but more deeply. She spoke fewer words, but felt them more fully. She forgave her son for dying, forgave herself for not knowing how to mourn. And one day she whispered to the empty altar, "I don't know if you hear me, but I'm here now, and maybe that's enough." Tonight, if your practice feels hollow, if your prayers feel dry, if your search for peace has become another form of control, pause. Let yourself be still. Let the beads rest. Let the ritual soften. You are not failing if you don't feel sacred. You are not less worthy if you weep instead of chant. You are not forgotten if silence answers you, as the Buddha said. Better than 1,000 meaningless words is one word of peace, spoken in truth. Let that truth be your breath. Let that peace be your presence. Let your prayers come not from fear, but from the willingness to be real. And sleep tonight, not in ritual, but in rest. 23. The forest forgets your name. He came to the forest with too many names, titles, labels, roles, introductions that spilled out of his mouth like rehearsed monologues in the city. They mattered, they opened doors, they bought respect, they reminded him who he was, especially when he no longer believed it himself. But now, after everything had crumbled, a scandal he didn't see coming, a betrayal from someone he trusted, and the slow unraveling of the reputation he had spent decades weaving. He carried those names like stones, so he left, packed lightly, told no one, and walked until the skyline disappeared, and the trees took over. He entered the forest, not looking for anything in particular, only for something that didn't need to know who he was the first night. He camped near a narrow stream, no signal, no reception, no calendar reminders. He sat by the water and watched the moon rise through the bare branches for the first time in years. No one was expecting anything of him. He didn't have to perform, explain, impress, or defend, and yet the silence was not peaceful. It was unsettling. He found himself wanting to say his name aloud, just to remember that he existed. He whispered it once, then again, but the forest didn't answer. The stream kept moving, the trees didn't bow, the moon didn't blink, and slowly he realized doubt here, his name meant nothing, and strangely, that frightened him. For days, he walked deeper, the forest grew thicker, the path less defined. He stopped checking the map, stopped counting miles. He ate when hungry, slept when tired. The voices in his head, those that said he was finished, ruined, a failure, began to quiet, not disappear, but lose their edge, because no one in the forest knew what he had done or failed to do. The birds did not ask for a resume, the wind did not remember his mistakes, the moss did not judge him, and slowly, breath by breath, he began to feel something strange. He began to feel free. On the 7th day, he met the hermit, an old man with a beard like tangled roots, sitting near a fire, brewing tea in a cracked ceramic pot. The man looked up as he approached. "Sit," he said. They drank in silence. Then the old man asked, "What name did you leave behind?" He hesitated, then replied, "Too many." The old man chuckled. "Good," he said. "Then you might still find yourself." The man frowned. "But I don't even know what that means anymore." The old man nodded. "That's when the real finding begins." They stayed together for 2 nights. The hermit taught him how to listen to the trees, not for messages, but for rhythm. He taught him how to walk without purpose, how to let the body lead, how to let thoughts rise and fall like birds without needing to catch them. He didn't teach him philosophy, only presence. And on the morning of the 3rd day, as they parted ways, the hermit handed him a folded piece of bark with one sentence etched in charcoal. The forest forgets your name so you can remember your being. There is a Zen story of a scholar who came to a master and said, "I have studied the sutras, taught the Dharma, led many." The master said, "Then take off your name and come back." The scholar returned months later, tired and silent. The master asked, "Who are you now?" The scholar smiled, "No one in particular." The master bowed, "Then now you may begin." Modern psychology tells us that identity is a construct, a collage of memories, projections, social reflections. We are taught from childhood to shape ourselves according to roles, daughter, leader, victim, success. But these are garments, useful at times, but heavy when clung to. When they crumble us, they often do, we suffer not because we've lost ourselves, but because we've confused the role with the real. Healing is not finding a better identity. It is remembering that you exist before any label is applied on. In awareness, in presence, in being. He stayed in the forest for 2 more weeks. Each day, he said less each night. He shed another belief that he needed to be understood, that he had to redeem his name. That silence meant erasure. He learned to enjoy his own company again. He forgave no one. He only stopped needing someone to blame. He did not write in a journal. He let the trees record his breath. And one afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the shadows danced across the trail, he felt something shift, not dramatically, but completely. The ache that had followed him for months loosened, and in its place came stillness, not joy, not relief, just stillness. And it was enough. When he returned to the edge of the world he once knew, a stranger on the roadside asked him, "What's your name, friend?" He paused, smiled, then said, "Whatever you'd like to call me," and kept walking. Tonight, if you feel lost, if the name you wear no longer fits, or has been stained or stripped from you, you are tired of explaining who you are, close your eyes and step inward into the forest of your breath. Let the leaves erase the signatures. Let the wind carry the stories. You do not need to be remembered. You only need to remember that you are here. Before your name, you are whole. Before your title, you are still, as the Buddha said. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What you think, you become. So tonight, think less, breathe more. Let the forest forget your name and remember your being. 24. The one who was not born from a very young age. She felt like she did not belong. It wasn't sadness, not exactly, not even loneliness, just a quiet, persistent distance between herself and the world. Like being wrapped in a clear veil, watching people move and speak and laugh, but not quite knowing how to step into their rhythm. Her name was Landot. She was bright, sensitive, polite. She followed rules, answered questions, correctly smiled at the right moments. But under it all, something floated beneath the surface of her skin. Question with no shape, no words. Why do I feel like I'm only pretending to be here? She didn't speak of it, not as a child, not as a teenager, not as an adult. People liked her, respected her. She was careful to become who they needed her to be. She wore the mask with grace. She achieved enough to seem successful. She dated enough to seem normal. But always, the question returned, not in language, in sensation, at parties, in meetings. At dinners, a slow fading from the center of the room, as if she were watching herself occupy the moment, but not truly inside it. a ghost in her own life, one night. She broke down. There was no cause, no heartbreak, no tragedy, just the weight of pretending, the ache of feeling like she had lived beside her life instead of within it. She packed a small bag and left the city. She told no one, took a train north and stepped off at a village she had never visited. There, at the edge of a mountain path, was a temple, old, silent, waiting. She bowed at the gate and entered. The monks accepted her without question, gave her a room, a cushion, a bowl. She offered no story, only silence, and they offered silence in return. It was the first time she felt seen without being measured. In the early days, she moved with caution, afraid of being found out, afraid that even here she didn't truly belong. But no one pushed her, no one asked. She woke, she swept, she sat, she breathed, and one afternoon, sitting alone by the pond, she whispered, "I don't think I'm real." The abbot, who had approached without sound, sat beside her. He didn't respond, only picked up a leaf from the water, held it to the light, then let it fall. Again, Lan watched it drift, and felt something in her chest loosen. That evening, she asked him, "Why do I feel like I wasn't meant to be here?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Because you still think you are something born." She blinked. "I don't understand." He nodded. "That's good." He stood and left her with the question. "There is a Zen koan," a monk asked. "What was my original face before I was born?" The master smiled and pointed at the rising moon later that night. The monk understood, but could not explain, because some truths are not conclusions, they are dissolutions. The days passed. Lan stopped seeking answers. She let the question remain, not as a problem, as a companion. She stopped needing to feel real and began noticing what was already real. The sound of her breath before dawn, the cold floor under her knees, the weight of a bowl in her hands. One morning, sweeping the temple gate, a thought came to her not as an idea, but as clarity. I was never born as the person I tried to be, only constructed, layer by layer, expectation by expectation. Now, gently, each layer was falling away, not violently, not dramatically, just like the leaf on water, and in their absence, something deeper emerged, not a self, but a presence, not identity, but awareness, that watched, that stayed, that did not need to belong, because it was never separate. She went to the abbot, sat across from him, and said, "I think I've never really been outside this moment." He smiled. "And yet, you spent your whole life trying to get in." She nodded. "I still don't have words for it." "Good," he said. "Now you are beginning to speak." In modern psychology, there is a growing awareness of depersonalization, feeling detached from the self, often misunderstood as illness. It can also point to something deeper, a spiritual intuition that the self we present is not the whole story, that beneath the mind, the roles, the performance, something wordless waits. We are taught to build identities, but not how to see through them yet. The deepest peace is not found in improving the self. It is found in remembering what was never broken, the unborn, the unconnedy, the quiet space that exists before every thought says, "I am this." Lan stayed another month. She no longer measured time, no longer asked, what was next? She still felt sensations of detachment, but now she welcomed them as signs that the mask was dissolving, that she had never been missing, only mistaken. The night before she left. She sat again by the pond. The moon hung low. Her reflection looked back, but she didn't feel the need to name it. She bowed, not to the image, but to the one who had never left, the one who had never been born and could never die tonight. If you feel distant from yourself, if you move through the world like a visitor, if you question your reality, your belonging, your being, do not panic. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are returning to the space before names, to the space before names, to the awareness that watches even this doubt arise. You are not your story. You are the one who sees it unfold. As the Buddha said, there is, monks, an unborn, unoriginated, uncreated, unformed. Were there not that unborn, unoriginated, uncreated, unformed, there would be no escape from what is born, originated, created, formed. Let yourself dissolve into breath. Let the identity soften, and sleep tonight not as someone who must prove they are real, but as the one who never needed to. 25. The sound of one moon breathing. He had climbed the hill every night for 3 weeks. The others at the temple didn't question it. Each had their way. Some sat in the zendo, some walked the stone path. He here went to the hill behind the pagoda, where the trees opened like 2 palms, and the moon hung low over the far mountains. His name was Kan, a man past middle age, silent, deliberate, slow in speech, and slower in reaction. No one knew exactly what had led him here. He had arrived in the rain, soaking wet but composed, like someone who had walked through 1,000 storms without flinching. He spoke only once upon entering. I am tired of holding myself together. The abbot had smiled. Then, perhaps, it's time to let go. So Kan came and climbed, night after night. He didn't sit in posture. He didn't recite chants. He only stood, watched, breathed, until one evening, when the moon was full and still and bluer than usual, he whispered a question he had carried for decades. What is left when I stop becoming? The wind did not stir. The grass didn't rustle. Only the moon remained, and in that moment he heard it. Not sound, exactly, not silence, but something in between, like a breath held across lifetimes, the sound of one moon breathing. He sat down, his legs folded, as if they had always known the earth. His hands rested on his knees, not as practice, but as surrender, and the question he had asked began to dissolve, because the moon did not answer. It only continued to be, and he began to understand. That was the answer. Years earlier, he had chased every answer. He had read sutras, books, essays, studied under masters, tried vipassana, tried koans, tried letting go of trying. But always, he had remained on the edge of something, as if life were a room he could not fully enter, as if he were a shadow beside his own name. And when people asked him what he was looking for, he said, "Whatever lives beneath all this noise." But he never found it until now. Here in this soundless breath of moonlight, there is a Zen story of a student who asked his master, "What is enlightenment?" The master said, "The sound of a bell that rings once but is never struck." The student waited years to hear it. He left the monastery, disappointed, but on his final night, while walking through the forest, he paused to drink from a stream and heard something, not a bell, not silence, but something in between. He stood very still and wept because, finally, he was no longer asking. Ken stayed on the hill until morning. He watched the light shift, the stars fade, the moon retreat, and with it, the need for answers. He walked back slowly. The monks greeted him with tea. He didn't say what he had seen. He no longer needed to explain his piece, and that, too, was new. In psychology, we speak of integration, the point at which the fragmented self no longer tries to fix, perform, or outrun its wounds. Not because healing is complete, but because identity is no longer built on rupture. In spiritual terms, we might call this wholeness, not perfection, not transcendence, but the return to what has always been, that which breathes before the breath, that which hears before the ears, that which is not born, does not die, and cannot be named. The sound of the moon breathing can remain at the monastery for several more seasons. He helped in the garden, taught the novices how to listen to birds without naming their calls, how to sweep without measuring progress. He smiled more, slept more, rarely spoke until one evening, when a young monk, frustrated with his own restless thoughts, sat beside him on the hill and asked, "When will my mind stop chasing?" Ken looked at the moon, then said, "When you realize it has never left." The monk frowned. "I don't understand." Ken touched the center of his own chest, then the earth, then the sky, then went silent. The monk followed his gaze, and slowly began to breathe, not to fix, not to solve, only to be. That night, the wind moved gently across the hill. The moon rose, round and slow. No one spoke, no one named it, but everyone, somehow, heard it, the breath of something ancient, something patient, something without desire, and no one needed to call it truth. It was enough that it was there, enough that they could hear, enough that they could stop. Tonight, if you are still searching, if your mind loops endlessly in the shape of your own name, if you are trying to become someone worth being, pause, step outside, or close your eyes and step within. Find the hill in you, find the moon that waits. Do not ask it for answers, do not measure your stillness, simply sit, simply breathe. You may hear nothing, you may hear everything, or you may hear the one sound that was never meant to be spoken, the one that says, "There is nowhere left to go." As the Buddha said, within this body and mind is found all of the teachings. Let yourself return, not as someone better, not as someone new, but as the one who was never absent, and sleep tonight, not in silence, but in the sound of one moon breathing. Thank you for sailing with us through this journey of stillness, silence, and soft remembering. If these stories touched something quiet inside you, if they reminded you of who you are beneath the noise, if they gave you room to breathe, or helped you feel a little more whole, then the empty boat has done its work. We would love to hear what resonated with you, which story lingered in your chest, which line returned to you when all words had left. Leave us a comment, share your reflections. Let others know how these gentle teachings moved through your life. And if this kind of slow, mindful storytelling brings you peace, please like this video, share it with someone who may need it, and subscribe to The Empty Boat for more offerings from the quiet side of the soul. Until next time, may your path be soft, your breath be kind, and your presence be enough. We'll be here, always drifting, always listening in the empty boat.